Hey, long time no see, I will try to stay consistent on this. So in this video we are going to see, what if Deku has Overhaul before one for all. And please do check out story named Midoriya Izuku, Overhauled by Mr. Cold Arrow. And make sure to leave a like, share and subscribe. Let's get into the video. Izuku slowly made his way down the sidewalk, still too scared from what had just happened earlier to even think about where he was going. He kept his eyes exclusively on his hands, making sure they didn't touch anything. As he looked at them, memories from the previous night replayed in his mind. Izuku, you have to stop. Izuku, stop. It's your quirk, it's manifested. If you calm down, it'll stop. Izuku, you need to. Izuku tried to forget what had happened. But no matter what, his mind kept coming back to the moment where he touched his mother and she was completely destroyed, leaving only her blood in the air. The fact that the people on the street at this time were avoiding him suggested that his clothes had been at least partially stained with blood. For the most part, he was glad they were staying away from him, but their small part of him wanted one of them to at least ask if he was okay. But, alas, nobody even gave him a second thought. At least, until he accidentally bumped into a middle-aged man wearing a red dress shirt and pinstriped pants held up by suspenders. When Izuku looked into his face, he saw he had relatively spiky features, most notably his hair, which reminded Izuku of Bakugo. "The hell do you shit, the hell happened to you, kid?" the man asked, his anger quickly being replaced with a mixture of shock, worry, and mild annoyance. "You look like you came from a murder scene," he added. Izuku tried his best to find the right words, but he found that no matter how he moved his mouth he couldn't say a single word. "Is something wrong, Iranaka?" an older voice asked. The man, apparently named Iranaka, looked behind him. "Some brat covered in blood just bumped into me. Not sure if he can talk, boss," Iranaka explained. Izuku subconsciously registered the fact that the other man was an boss but didn't decide to think about it any further than that. A few seconds later, an old man, who Izuku presumed to be the boss, appeared from behind Iranaka and took a look at Izuku. What happened to you, boy? Are you lost?" the boss asked. Izuku slowly shook his head after a moment. After all, how could he be lost if he had no destination in mind? The boss sighed. "All right, where are your parents? Did they care about you, or did they just let you go wherever?" the boss asked. Izuku stiffened at the mention of parents, and he could feel tears start rolling down his face. My quirk," Izuku managed to say after a minute while looking at his hands. It didn't take long for the boss to piece together what had happened. He hummed before turning away. "Well, if you have nowhere to go, follow me," the boss ordered. Despite Izuku not even knowing the man for more than 2 minutes, he decided to follow him anyways. Iranaka hesitantly followed as well. The boss led them to a polished black car and opened the passenger seat up front. He clicked open the glove box and pulled out a pair of gloves. He then shut the glove box and door and turned back to Izuku, who looked up at him nervously. His hands now resting in a weird position where they were held up as high as his elbows and his hands draped down, reminiscent of a ghost. "Put these on your hands. If it's a touch-based quirk, those should cancel out any effect they have," the boss said. Izuku followed his instructions, and while the gloves didn't really fit his hands, they still worked. Izuku touched a nearby tree out of curiosity and was happy to see that the tree stayed perfectly intact. "Thank you," Izuku said, looking at the boss with a small smile. The man smiled back as well, and he opened a door in the back. Izuku cocked his head to the side in curiosity as the man just stood there looking at Izuku. "Well, come on, get in, you're coming with us. I can't leave a child alone on the streets, can I?" the boss said, gesturing towards the open door. Izuku hesitated for a moment. Hadn't his mother told him to not get in cars with strangers? But, then again, this stranger had just helped Izuku and he didn't seem that mean. Iranaka, on the other hand, was mean, but all things considered he'd take a nice stranger and a mean stranger over no strangers in a lonely night on the streets. So, Izuku got into the car. And the boss shut the door once Izuku clicked his seatbelt on. Then, Irinaka got in the driver's seat while the boss took the passenger seat in the front, and soon after the trio were driving off. A few minutes later, Izuku realized just how tired he had been, and promptly fell asleep. "Boss, what are you planning with this kid?" Irinaka asked once he was certain that the kid was asleep. He was curious as to why his boss had, for whatever reason, decided to just take this random kid in, and he wanted answers. "I was like him when I was younger," the boss replied. Irinaka blinked in surprise. As the boss had never talked about when he was a kid, alone on the streets with dead parents and only the clothes on my back. "The only reason I'm here is because of the old boss of the Shihasaikai. When I saw this boy, I saw a part of myself in him, and I felt like that if I wanted to truly repay the debt I owed the old boss, then I would need to take this boy in just like the boss did with me." Irinaka hummed. "So, are ya gonna make him the next leader?" Irinaka asked. The boss was silent for a moment. "No, the Yakuza's days are long gone. To bring him up to be my successor would be selfish. And I would not feel right with forcing a dead idea on an innocent child. I'll keep him far away from the Shihasaikai and nurture him and help him grow into a Manda. T will be ready for the world by the time I'm gone," the boss replied. While Irinaka didn't like to hear it, he had to agree that it would be foolish to prolong the Yakuza any longer. Their days were long over. And they were the last of a dying breed. What will happen with the Hasaikai once you're, Irinaka couldn't bring himself to finish that sentence properly, but the boss understood what Irinaka was implying anyways. He was silent for a moment. "I don't know," was all he replied. And that was the only word shared for the rest of the drive. Izuku awoke the next day in a futon. Izuku brushed off until he remembered what had happened last night. The last thing he remembered was looking out the window in the car at night, and not only was he now in a bed, according to the window it was daytime. He also took note of the room he was in. It had a traditional Japanese style, with ornamental dragons painted on the canvas walls. Izuku decided to get out of his futon and explore the place. And as he pulled the cover off, he realized he still had the gloves on from last night, still too large for anything practical. Once out of the futon, Izuku walked over to the door and pushed it open, which led into a hallway in the same style as the room he was just in. "Hello," Izuku called out, not really knowing what else to do. He heard that soft patter of footsteps, and soon enough a man with blonde hair and glasses came down the hallway. He was wearing a simple black suit with gray loafers, and his face looked apathetic at best. "Ah, you're awake. About time. Come on, the boss wants to speak with you. And you're lucky enough that you get to be taken there by the extraordinary me rather than one of those other thugs," he explained before quickly turning away and walking back down the hall. Izuku did his best to catch up to him, but he practically had to jog just to keep up with the man. From how he spoke, Izuku could tell he was pretty egotistical, for some reason, and didn't hold many other people in high regard. Izuku did take note of how he called the other people thugs, and now that he was in a calmer mindset, he registered that he said, "the boss." Now, Izuku was by no means knowledgeable about many things, as he was only 6 years old, but he was starting to piece together that these people might not be on the correct side of the law. But, they were the only ones who helped him. So they can't be that bad, right? "We're here. Make sure you be respectful to the boss." Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts by his rather rude guide, who had stopped just outside a door. After a moment, he opened the door, revealing the old man from last night, who Izuku remembered was the boss. He looked up from a book he was reading in and smiled slightly when he saw Izuku. "Good morning, kid. Did you sleep well?" the boss asked Izuku. "Thank you for bringing him, Nemoto. You may leave," he added, to which the man, who must be named Nemoto, bowed and promptly left the room and closed the door behind him. Izuku stood where he was, unsure of what to do. He settled on fiddling with his loose gloves, which now Izuku looked at them he could see that there were dark stains in the black fabric of the gloves. However, seeing as he was only 6 he did not have the mental ability to realize what had caused these stains. "What's your name, kid? I can't just be calling you kid all the time, now. Can I?" the boss asked, which made Izuku jump. Izuku M. Midoriya," Izuku stuttered out, slightly intimidated by the man. "Midoriya, fits with your hair. Anyways, moving on." It'll be helpful if we get to know exactly what your quirk is. You can't just live with those gloves forever, can you? Izuku stiffened at the mention of his quirk, and his arm subconsciously returned to the pose they assumed last night, with his hands held at elbow height and draped down, which seemed to be something he did to prevent them from touching anything. The boss sighed and stood up from his desk. Closing the book, which Izuku could see had a red cover with black splotches on the front, and putting it down. Yeah, I thought that would happen. Come on, we're going to the quirk doctor. They'll figure it out better than any of us could, the boss said. And so, for the second time in the last 24 hours, Izuku followed the boss into a car. They arrived at the quirk doctor soon enough, and had to wait in the waiting room to be called in. Seeing as he was 6, and the usual age of quirk manifestation is 4, Izuku didn't have anyone there his age to play with or talk to. So instead he gingerly held a magazine in his hands. He didn't understand much, but he knew it was about science. He was hooked immediately on the pictures. It seemed to be all about science, with chemistry, biology, geology, etc. Izuku was sad when he got called up to the office, and the boss had to ask him to put it back. They entered the office to see a short fat man wearing a lab coat and some strange goggles, along with a mustache and not a single strand of hair on his head. The doctor immediately noticed the gloves on Izuku's hands, and quickly wrote down on a notepad about something Izuku couldn't see. So, Izuku-san, you've just recently manifested your quirk. Izuku nodded to that, and I'll assume it has something to do with your hands. Izuku nodded again, although a little shaky this time. The doctor wrote something on his notepad again. And can you describe exactly what happened when your quirk manifested? Izuku began to shake when he thought about it, but he still somehow managed to splutter out a reply. I was everything ITT touched was destroyed. The doctor wrote this down in his notepad as well, his brows furrowed. The boss looked at Izuku with worry in his eyes. The kid was clearly traumatized from what happened. He'd have to look into some kind of therapy, maybe. The doctor finished writing and opened a drawer from his desk, out of which he pulled a bouncy ball, which he promptly threw to Izuku. Izuku barely caught the ball and looked at the doctor in confusion. Take off one of your gloves and touch it with one finger, the doctor explained. Izuku took off the glove, which came off relatively easily due to its size, and he rested a fingertip on the ball. Nothing happened. All right, try 2 fingers. Izuku did this, and once again there were no results. The process repeated until Izuku was holding the wall using all 10 fingers. The doctor hummed and wrote this down in his notepad. It seems that your quirk is not automatically activated when you touch something, and considering what you said, that is probably for the best. The boss breathed a sigh of relief, thankful that Izuku wouldn't end up being a walking, talking uncontrollable weapon of mass destruction. So, that means we need to find the activation for it. The process is simple. I'll tell you to do something, and you'll do that. If your quirk does not activate, then we try the next method. Understand? And so, they slowly made their way down the list. From clenching his butt to slapping, they tried everything on the list, and eventually they found what the activation condition was. Try tensing your fingers up, like this, the doctor ordered, demonstrating with his own hand. Izuku nodded, looking slightly frustrated from all the failures so far. However, that frustration was soon replaced with shock when the ball finally disintegrated into particles. In his shock, Izuku thought about how he didn't want to destroy the ball because it wasn't his property, and that he wished he could fix it, and as he thought this, his fingers flexed a bit while touching the particles. And so, to everyone's further shock, the ball repaired itself not just to its original state, but even better. The doctor took note of how a scorch mark that was originally on the ball was now gone. The man chuckled in awe at what he had just seen. Well, it seems there is more to your quirk than just destruction. Were you thinking anything between destroying the ball and restoring it? Izuku thought back for a moment before remembering. I'm pretty sure I was thinking about how I wanted to fix it because it didn't belong to me, Izuku replied. The doctor chuckled at this as well. Well then, it seems this is an amazingly powerful quirk. Based on my current theory, your quirk works by touching an object and then tensing your fingers, which activates your quirk and destroys the object. Then, if you want to repair the object to its original state, or even better, You do the same process for destroying it, but you imagine fixing the object in your head. With enough training, I'd imagine you could even control how much of the object you destroy, or perhaps even be able to reassemble an object into a different form. The doctor explained. Izuku looked at the ball in wonder, and as he did, he destroyed it and then repaired it again. A smile of wonder appeared on his face as he realized just how amazing his quirk was. So, what should his quirk be called? The boss spoke up. The doctor hummed for a moment before turning to a computer on his desk and tapping a bit on his keyboard. After an awkward minute of him doing that, he clapped his hands and turned back to Izuku and the boss with a smile on his face. Well, considering the fact he can disassemble and then reassemble an object, how about we call his quirk Overhaul? Izuku looked up with a face that showed he was thinking about it. Overhaul. What does that mean? He asked, turning to the boss. It means to take apart something and maybe repair it, the boss replied. Izuku smiled and looked at the doctor. I love it, he said. All right then, Overhaul it is. The doctor replied. He turned back to his computer and opened up an app, which took him to the quirk registry. He signed in and searched up Izuku Midoriya, which opened to a file for a 6-year-old with curly green hair and freckles. In the quirk section, the doctor clicked edit and typed a couple words. Once he was done, he saved it and the page reloaded to show the updated file. Izuku Midoriya, quirk, Overhaul. Alright, brat, what do you want to do in the future? Despite his looks, Nemoto was actually far meaner than Irinaka. Living in the Shihasaikai compound for 8 years had taught Izuku that. Sure, Irinaka could be cranky. But he was pretty decent most of the time. Nemoto. He was either being rude or egotistical, and Izuku wasn't sure which one he disliked more. It didn't help that Nemoto was his assigned teacher. Seeing as Izuku was homeschooled, and while he was good at teaching, he went about it in a rather rude way of it. Well, I've considered a couple things, Izuku replied nervously. Scratching his curly hair with a gloved hand. Despite the fact he could now control his quirk well, he liked to wear the gloves simply out of habit, and if he didn't wear them his arms defaulted to what he liked to call ghost position, where his hands were as high as his elbows and draped down. Like what? We don't have unlimited time here, so hurry it up. Nemoto spat as he adjusted his glasses. Well, the first thing I've considered is a scientist, like David Shield, Izuku said. Nemoto let out an You'd probably do well there, I'll give you that. I also considered being a doctor. Seeing as my quirk is good for healing, Nemoto squinted his eyes. You say that as if you realize there's a better option, Nemoto said. Despite Izuku's partial dislike of Nemoto, he had to admit he was exceptionally good at reading people. Izuku sighed, knowing how Nemoto would probably react to what he was about to say. Well, it was after that I realized that I would be even better at healing people if I could be there at the moment when they get hurt, so that's when I came to the conclusion that I should be a hero. The room went dead silent, and Izuku could feel a calm rage coming from Nemoto. It was pretty obvious that mentioning heroes in a positive light around Yakuza was a poor idea, especially seeing as it's because of heroes like All Might that the Yakuza were as weak as they are today. Midoriya, I want you to listen very closely, Nemoto muttered with a scarily calm voice that just barely masked his anger. Heroes are filthy scum that stomp down those who have been considered worthless or bad by society. They live only to push themselves higher atop the bodies of the villains they defeat. They are no better than villains. In some cases, they are even worse than villains. Understand? Izuku, however, would not give up. A true hero always stands firm by their beliefs, and he wasn't going to back down after a guy like Nemoto questioned his beliefs. But there are true heroes. What about Recovery Girl, or 13? Both of them are non-combat heroes who focus on healing and rescue respectively. Izuku retorted. Nemoto's hand balled into a fist, and he grit his teeth. But the vast majority are combat heroes who get paid to beat up villains. If I trained my quirk, I could knock out villains with a single touch. No unnecessary violence in the first place. At this, Nemoto stood up and slammed his hands on the table. Listen here, brat. The boss will not accept you being a hero. It goes against. And who said I would not agree with young Midoriya's ambition? Nemoto went still as soon as he heard the voice, and when he turned around he saw the boss standing in the doorway with an indifferent face to the situation. While I do, admittedly, have certain opinions on heroes, I see no reason why Midoriya would be a bad one. His quirk would be amazingly helpful in rescue, combat and support. It would be a waste to force him away from heroics, as Nemoto spluttered. A familiar person poked their head in the room. Hey, Izuku, you done with school? I was wondering if you wanna go to the arcade, Kurono asked. Izuku, thankful for an excuse to leave, quickly stood up from his seat. Yeah, I'm done. Thanks, Nemoto. See you, boss, Izuku said as he left the room and followed Kurono. Kurono had joined the Hasaikai a little after Izuku had been taken in by the boss. And the two had quickly become best friends seeing as they were the same age. In fact, Kurono was also planning on going to UA like Izuku, but he'd be going into the support course. Specifically design, as he loved designing ideas for costumes and was quite skilled at it. So, you want to be a hero? Kurono asked as they walked through the compound. Izuku shrugged. I know it's kind of a taboo idea seeing as we're surrounded by Yakuza, but ever since I watched All Might's debut video, I've always wanted to save people, you know. And, like, my quirk is perfect for it, as the boss was saying. Izuku replied. Kurono hummed. Fair enough, Kurono shrugged. And so, they walked to the arcade in relative silence, occasionally talking about something or other. The most common topic was quirk science, which they both enjoyed, although Izuku was the definitive expert on it. Eventually, they arrived at the arcade, only to see that it's closed. Are you kidding me? Kurono cried as they looked at the sign on the front door of the arcade. Izuku just sighed. Well, what now? Izuku asked. I'm just gonna head back. Nothing else I wanna do really. You coming? No. I might wander around town a bit. Kurono nodded at that and left, leaving Izuku outside the closed arcade. Izuku decided to turn left and start walking down the sidewalk. A couple people looked at him a bit as they walked by, which Izuku really couldn't blame. He was practically asking for it by wearing a green bomber jacket with a purple fluff collar, a black dress shirt with a white tie, charcoal slacks, white sneakers and white surgical gloves. He did wish they'd look at something else though. As luck would have it, such thing popped into existence just as Izuku thought that. And by popped, I mean exploded. Kaboom! Izuku's head violently twisted back to see smoke rising from an alley and he could just barely see orange tinting the walls. He ran over to where a crowd was already forming. And as he pushed his way to the front of the group he started to fully see the scene that was unfolding in front of them. There was a villain made of some kind of dark green sludge. And inside the sludge Izuku could see a figure struggling to break free. Izuku could see that the figure seemed to be a boy around his age, with spiky blonde hair and angry-looking red eyes. For some reason, he looked familiar. But Izuku couldn't put a finger on where he'd seen him before. A couple seconds later, an explosion popped from his palms, and suddenly Izuku realized who this was. Kachan. Izuku whispered as he recognized him fully now. Yes, Bakugo seemed to have not changed much in the past few years when it came to looks. As for personality, well, Izuku hoped he had mellowed out since the last time he saw him. Then, Izuku realized what he was doing. He was watching his old childhood friend slowly be suffocated by this villain, and now he realized that he also realized how it was kind of freaked up how everyone else was just watching too, and not only that, but nobody was able to help him. The heroes had arrived while he was thinking, and although there were 4 of them, none of them could get close. Backdraft was stuck fending off fires caused by Bakugo's explosions. Kamui Woods seemed to be evacuating people from nearby houses. Some new hero with a gigantific Asian quirk was trying to get in the alley, and Death Arms was being extremely useful by doing jack shit and standing to the side. Is nobody going to even attempt to save him? Izuku wondered. And as he thought that, a girl with orange hair in a ponytail rushed in towards the scene. Izuku was astonished by it. She seemed to be his age, and yet she was rushing into this situation without a second thought. And yet, the next thing Izuku knew, he was running next to her. Izuku tore off his jacket and chucked it at the villain, blinding it for a moment. Unfortunately, his quirk didn't work against liquids. So he was basically quirkless against the villain. Fortunately, the girl expanded her fist to a much larger size and in a couple movements pulled Bakugo out of the sludge. However, at that point, the villain had gotten Izuku's jacket out of his eyes, and was about to attack the girl. Not on my watch, Izuku tore off one of his gloves and slammed his hand to the ground. The ground in front of the girl was torn apart, and a second later was reformed into a wall, which blocked the villain from attacking her. Great work, citizens, but I'll take it from here. Out of nowhere, all MIGHT appeared and smashed through the wall Izuku built, and in the process, he also created enough wind pressure to blast the sludge villain all across the alley. There were a couple seconds of silence before suddenly it began to rain. Did All Might just change the weather in a single punch? A voice from the crowd asked. After that, the crowd exploded into cheers, cheering for All Might and his weather-changing punch. All Might did a quick peace sign to the crowd and then turned to Izuku, Bakugo and the ginger girl. Young citizens, that was quite the stunt you pulled. You're lucky you're unhurt. Anyways, I've gotta go. Get home safe. And with that, All Might jumped away. Holy shit, I just met All Might, Izuku spluttered out. That's what you're focusing on right now, the girl said. Izuku turned to her and shrugged. You really expect an idiot who ran into a villain attack to be logical? Izuku replied. Fair enough. Anyways, I'm Izuku Midoriya, and you are Itsuka Kendo. I'd shake your hand but I'm covered in sludge. Kendo laughed at her joke, which was short-lived as the heroes now approached them. That was extremely foolish. You could have killed yourselves. Death Arms started. Izuku didn't like Death Arms much, mainly because Death Arms was a pretty stupid name and he just genuinely didn't give off a good vibe. Izuku rolled his eyes. Listen, I was doing better than you. Seeing as all you did was stand by the crowd. And before you say something like, I was making sure they stayed back, you did a bang-up job of that anyways because Kendo-san and I both ran up here. Izuku spat back. Death Arms looked slightly uncomfortable about being called out and rightfully backed off. Kamui Woods, bless him, actually checked on Bakugo before scolding Izuku and Kendo. On the bright side, none of you seem to have any bad damage. According to the law, I have to scold you for using your quirk in public and also running into an active villain event. According to my ideals, I have to tell you that you did an awesome job and that I will pretend this never happened, capiche? Izuku and Kendo nodded. After that, paramedics checked on Bakugo but he was cleared as he had no lasting injuries and didn't need any healing. That left Kendo, Bakugo and Izuku alone. I didn't need your help, you freaking extras. He growled, which made Izuku realize two things. 1. He'd become even worse since he last saw him, and 2. He didn't recognize him. Although considering his current personality and how he interacted with Izuku back when they were kids, Izuku was a little grateful that he hadn't realized who he was yet. So you would have preferred that we just watched you suffocate from that villain? Kendo replied. Bakugo huffed. A weak villain like that couldn't suffocate me. On the contrary, he probably could have. He was basically drowning you in the sewer equivalent of honey, and if I had to guess, you'd have probably been a goner. And another 30 seconds if nobody stepped in, Izuku commented. Bakugo looked at him in disdain before standing up and shoving his hands in his pockets. Whatever. Buzz off, he said as he left, leaving just Kendo and Izuku. They were silent for a moment. Wanna get ice cream? Izuku asked. Mint choc chip and apple. That's a weird combination, Kendo commented as they walked towards the compound from the ice cream shop. Izuku raised an eyebrow and glanced at Kendo's ice cream. Like you can talk, with your coffee and vanilla ice cream. Kendo shrugged at this response and stuck her tongue out at Izuku. It turned out they were a surprisingly compatible duo, despite seeming like complete opposites. Perhaps it was because they both wanted to go to the UA Hero course, but maybe it was some other reason. Anyways, did you recognize that guy back there? Just looked like you knew him from somewhere from the way you looked at him, Kendo asked. Izuku licked his ice cream in contemplation. Yeah, I am here. Out of nowhere, All Might appeared from an alley, and his sudden appearance made Izuku accidentally disassemble his ice cream and Kendo crush hers, although Izuku was lucky enough that he could just reassemble it. All Might. Izuku and Kendo cried out at the same time. Yes, I am, All Might said before spitting out some blood and he suddenly went from a large muse. Kular man to an emancipated skeletal man with sunken dark eyes and looked nowhere near like All Might. Ah, you're not All Might, Kendo cried. Why, you're an imposter. A villain. Izuku accused, pointing a finger at All Might, while licking his ice cream. All Might sighed and looked at them. No, I am All Might. It's just, complicated, yeah. Kendo and Izuku raised an eyebrow, and All Might cringed as he realized they didn't believe him. So, in response, he lifted his shirt up to reveal a nasty wound on his side. This is a wound I got in a battle 6 years ago, one that wasn't broadcasted to the public. Since then, I've gone from being able to do hero work all day to only 3 hours. Understand? All Might explained as he let his shirt fall back down to cover the wound. Kendo and Izuku looked at each other. And Izuku gave a look that he hoped said, may as well believe him for now. If he is a fake, we can probably beat him. Kendo nodded and they looked back at All Might. All right then, but why are you telling us this? Kendo asked, folding her arms before immediately regretting that as she realized she still had ice cream on her hands, which she promptly wiped across a stone wall. All Might assumed a dramatic pose and lifted his arms up towards the sky. Young, what are your names? Izuku Midoriya. Itsuka Kendo. Yes, young Kendo and young Midoriya. I am here because I believe you are both worthy choices for my quirk, one for all Might announced, which put a look of shock on Izuku and Kendo's faces. One for, Kendo started. All, Izuku finished. That's right. My quirk has been passed on from generation to generation, and soon I will need a successor, which is why I have come to tell you about all of this. Okay, but is it really a good idea to tell the both of us? Kendo asked. All Might looked at her and raised an eyebrow. I'm afraid I do not understand. He replied. Kendo sighed. I mean, how many people would want your quirk? Millions, hell, billions probably. So what do you think happens when you tell two teens that they're both being considered for this power that? I don't want it. Kendo stopped talking and looked at Izuku along with All Might, which Izuku took as a cue to continue. I mean, your quirk is amazing, All Might, but I feel like if I took it then that wouldn't be fair to Kendo. I mean, my quirk is already super strong. Seeing as I can instantly destroy anything I touch or heal people, so adding super strength on top while leaving Kendo with just being able to enlarge her fists, no offense, seems kind of unfair, Kendo opened her mouth to reply and then closed it again, unable to find the words. She did this a few more times before responding. Are you sure, Midoriya? She asked. Izuku nodded immediately. 100%. The world would be better off having you as the next symbol to look up to than me, anyways, Izuku shrugged. All Might hummed before clapping his hands. Well, if that's so. I guess, young Kendo will become my successor. All Might said. Kendo nodded. It would be my honor to become All Might's successor, sir, All Might smiled. Fantastic. From what I can tell, you seem in good enough shape to do this, so, All Might said as he plucked a hair from his head, eat this. Kendo went dead silent. I'm sorry, what? Kendo asked as Izuku watched with mild amusement. My quirk can only be passed on through the consumption of my DNA. So come on, chew it down. Kendo hesitantly took the hair and gulped it down, making a pained face as she swallowed. After that, she looked at All Might. Okay, what now? She asked. It should come in by tomorrow. How about we all meet up at Takoba Municipal Beach tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to test it out, All Might suggested, which they all agreed to. Izuku and Kendo stood there for a moment as All Might left them alone together, neither of them talking to each other. Izuku silently thanked the gods had nobody had just seen what had taken place there between them and All Might. What the freak? The voice of Hari Kurono called out, which made Izuku droop in frustration. He really had to stop jinxing himself. I can't believe I have to take you with me now, Izuku grumbled as he made his way to Takoba Beach with Kurono walking with him. Don't talk about secret shit in public areas then, Kurono countered. The rising sun shined over the pathway, dappled from the trees that lined the side. Don't eavesdrop on conversations then, Izuku retorted. Let's just agree to disagree, we're nearly there, Kurono replied. Ending the argument. And he was right, as the trees began clearing away to reveal the trash-filled sands of Takoba Municipal Beach, and standing there was All Might, who was currently in his powered-down form. He took notice of Izuku and waved, but then raised an eyebrow at Kurono. Izuku jogged over with Kurono behind him to explain the situation. "Hey, All Might," Izuku greeted. "Young Midoriya, I'm glad to see you are here. However, why did you bring a friend? He accidentally overheard what you said while he went for a walk." "Oh, perhaps I should. Not talk about state secrets in a public area like that." "That sounds like a good idea." The group stood there in silence for a moment before someone spoke up again. "Kinda weird's just standing here casually with All Might himself. If the boss could see us, he'd probably be miffed at what we're doing," Kurono stated. All Might raised an eyebrow. "Who's this boss you speak of?" he asked. Yakuza boss. We aren't really involved with that though. I have no idea what the boss does when we aren't looking." Izuku explained. All Might sighed. "Yes, I would not expect a Yakuza boss to be particularly fond of the man that basically ended his career," All Might groaned. After that was silence again. "So, what are we doing here, All Might?" Kurono asked. "We'll be testing out 1-4. All now that young Kendo should have fully inherited it. Speaking of which, here she is now." And sure enough, Kendo came jogging up to the trio in her jogging clothes, which made Izuku realize that he should have worn something closer to that than the dress shirt and slacks he was currently wearing. Kendo smiled at Izuku and nodded at Kurono before looking up at All Might. "Good morning, All Might. What do I need to do?" Kendo asked. All Might smiled and turned into his buff form. "Today will be a simple gauge of how well my quirk suits your body. Luckily, your body seems to be at a point W. Here you will not simply explode when you try and activate it, so we don't need to do a whole training montage." Kurono, Izuku and Kendo laughed a bit when All Might said the thing about exploding, they soon realized he looked dead serious. "Wait, you weren't kidding when you said it would explode someone who isn't muscular?" Izuku cried out as the others' faces morphed into shock. All Might led sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head. "Yes, it's mainly because of all the power I've added to 1-for-all from all the years I've had it. Back when I received it wasn't nearly as powerful as it is today." All Might explained, which really showed just how long the hero had been working for if they'd added that much power. Kendo sighed and looked at All Might. "Alright, how should I do this? I doubt it's the same method of activation as my usual quirk." "Clench your butt cheeks, and within your heart, scream the word, SMAAAAASH. All Might explained, to exasperated looks from the three confused youths. Kendo sighed again for the millionth time that day and entered a combative pose while aiming towards the ocean. She cocked her fist back, and on her exposed forearm Izuku and Kurono could see the veins begin to glow red and shine brightly. Then, Kendo released a punch, which created a mass amount of air pressure, which practically parted the ocean ahead as if it were the Red Sea. And then Kendo's arm broke into a million freaking pieces. "Holy shit, it hurts," she screamed, swearing for what Izuku assumed was the first time he'd ever heard her swear. "Jesus Christ, that doesn't look much better than her arm exploding, All Might." Kurono cried as he looked between the screaming Kendo and the panicking All Might. As this was happening, Izuku used his quirk to disintegrate the glove he was wearing and dashed towards Kendo. "This might hurt for a moment," he warned as he gripped her forearm. A second later, it disassembled itself, creating a red mist of blood. Or Izuku repaired it to a state that was even better than before it was broken. Kendo stopped screaming, instead upgrading to heavy breathing. Meanwhile All Might let out a breath of relief and Kurono covered his face with his hands. If that was in despair or because he was sick of the situation or a combination of both, Izuku would never know. Well, it is certainly good that young Midoriya was capable of healing that injury. "I wouldn't have wanted to explain this to Recovery Girl," All Might said. Izuku snapped his fingers. "That reminds me, who else knows about 1-for-all? There's you, obviously, and then there's Kendo. Kurono and I. Surely there's a few more, right?" Izuku pointed out. All Might nodded and chose that moment to debuff himself. "Very observant, young Midoriya. A couple of other people know. Including Nezu from UA and Recovery Girl." Izuku nodded and sat down on the patch of sand and looked at Kendo, who was now mostly calm, but slightly shaky. And to be honest, Izuku would too if in the same 10 seconds her arm broke in multiple places and was then completely destroyed before being repaired. She tested her actual quirk and, sure enough, it was still there and normal. Which caused her to let out a sigh of relief. Well, she can't just keep doing that in every fight, she's got to learn how to fix it, Izuku stated, and everyone present agreed with this sentiment. All Might sighed and pulled out his phone. There is one person who may be able to help, but, All Might said. The looks the three teens gave him urged him to continue. He isn't exactly the nicest teacher, if you catch my drift. All Might? Kendo asked. Yes, young Kendo. I do not care if this teacher is the modern-day version of Adolf freaking Hitler, as long as he can stop me breaking my arm, then I'll take whatever he throws my way. All Might grinned at this, although it was a little strained. That's the spirit, my girl. Now, let's just hope he isn't too cranky when I call him, All Might added. He looked at the three teens. You can head home now, seeing as we can't make much progress if you'll just be breaking your arm. Kendo, Midoriya, I need you back here tomorrow at 6 a.m., Kurono raised an eyebrow. Why not me? Well, think about it, Kurono. Kendo has the quirk, and I can heal her if shit goes south. You can just extend your hair and slow people down, which while it is badass, is not useful to the situation, Izuku explained. Kurono sighed and shrugged. Fair enough, he replied. And so, the three teens left the beach, leaving All Might to make the most terrifying call he'd had to make in exactly 5 years and 8 months, which was coincidentally the last time he had called this person. All Might put the phone up to his ear as he heard it ring a couple times before finally picking up. Who's this? The aged voice of Gran Torino asked. It's T. Toshinori, All Might replied. Toshinori? Who's that? All Might groaned mentally about his old mentor playing a prank on him at this very moment. I mean All Might. That's better. Speaking of which, why don't ya ever call? Oh, I get it, it's because you've outgrown. I've found my successor, and when they used one for all they broke their arm, the other end was dead silent for a moment. You what? Gran Torino screamed, abandoning the old man act. I found. I heard you loud and clear, you fool. Why the hell didn't you start with that? Whatever, I'm guessing you need me because you've realized you can't really teach them how to not do that, right? Why yes. Fine, what time and place? Takoba Municipal Beach at 6 a.m., sir. Geez, that's early. Be there by 5:30. Why yes, Gran Torino. The other end went silent, and All Might realized that Torino must have ended the call. As he put his phone away, All Might sighed. He couldn't imagine spending a full 30 minutes alone with his old mentor would exactly be a nice experience. And with that, All Might flew off towards Tokyo. He needed to get ready for a day of heroics, after all. When Izuku arrived at the beach the next day, the last thing he expected to see was an old man beating Small Might, a name which Izuku had up with for All Might's debuffed form with a cane, as Small Might did nothing to retaliate while Kendo watched. Izuku walked up to Kendo and watched alongside her. Why is All Might letting himself be beat up by an old guy? Izuku asked, which Kendo shrugged at. I think this is the guy that All Might mentioned last night, and now that I see it, it makes a lot of sense as to why he was hesitant about this, Kendo explained. Izuku let out an, oh, which was enough for the old man to finally notice him. Who are you? Toshinori didn't say there'd be two of you. The old man yelled at Izuku. Which was ineffective against him, as back home if Nemoto wasn't yelling at Izuku then Irinaka was yelling at someone else. I'm Izuku Midoriya. My quirk lets me heal people, among other things. So it was agreed that I should be present just in case Kendo breaks her arm, Izuku replied. The old man looked at him for another moment before nodding. Then he turned to Kendo. All right, you zygote, he said in a voice that wasn't yelling but just slightly raised and firm. I'm Gran Torino, and seeing as this brute can't teach anything, it'll be up to me to teach you to be able to use this god-forsaken quirk. At this rate, I'll be alive for the goddamn 12th user who I'll also have to train, aren't I? He muttered that last part, but Izuku and Kendo still picked up on it. Wait, how many users have there been before me? Kendo asked, suddenly sounding uncertain. 8, including Toshinori, Gran Torino replied. And how young did these users die? Gran Torino was silent before. He spun around to whack Small Might again. Toshinori, you didn't even explain to her about how taking this quirk had deeper implications than just super strength. Izuku and Small Might watched as Gran Torino beat the shit out of Kendo every single time she tried to use One for All, both of them thankful that they weren't on the receiving end of Gran Torino's walking stick. So, this is the man who trained you? Izuku asked as Torino whacked Kendo in the back of the leg for attempting to do an enhanced punch. All Might nodded. Yes. He was very strict, as you can see. So did he have One for All before you? No. He was a friend of my master before she was killed. He simply finished what my master started by training me. There was silence for a moment. I'm sorry about your master. Don't apologize. It's not your fault. She knew what she was getting into when she accepted the quirk. As their conversation ended, they took note of how this time Kendo enlarged her fist before using One for All. Interestingly, once she used it, her hand and arm were still damaged but far less than earlier. Either way, Izuku walked over to Kendo and healed her, and after she checked her original quirk was indeed still working, Izuku walked back to All Might. So, young Midoriya, may I ask what exactly your quirk is? You said it can heal, among other things, which implies that healing is simply an effect achievable through your quirk, All Might asked. Izuku had to admit that while All Might could be slightly ignorant at times, he was still perceptive. Good eye. Or, well, ear. Anyways, my quirk is called Overhaul, and to sum it up as simply as possible, I can disassemble and reassemble anything I touch, Izuku explained. Do you have to reassemble what you touch? Or will it automatically be repaired? I can choose to just disassemble something, including. Izuku suddenly went quiet as he remembered something that happened almost a decade ago. The details were slightly glossy. But the screams were still as detailed as the night he'd heard them. My boy, are you quite alright? You're breathing heavily and you look panicked. Izuku was snapped out of his panic attack by All Might, who had grabbed his shoulders and was holding him firmly. Izuku slowly corrected his breathing and barely repressed a sob. Why yeah. It's just, I remembered how my quirk manifested. From looking into his eyes, Izuku could tell that All Might had pieced together most of the story. I'm sorry for bringing that up, young Midoriya. That must have been a bad time, I'd assume, All Might said. Izuku shook his head. It's fine. It was a long time ago, and the boss treats me well. He always made sure I was feeling fine, and he had me homeschooled. Although, now I think about it, maybe that wasn't the best idea, because social interaction isn't my strong suit, and I only really talk with Kurono and Kendo, which means I won't be very good at communication. Which is vital for heroics, Izuku replied. I see no reason why you'd be bad at it. I mean, you get along with young Kendo and Kurono quite well, don't you? Izuku shook his head. Well, I mean, I do. But Kurono is because we grew up together, and with Kendo I'd put that up to the slight adrenaline and confidence boost from going to fight that sludge villain that led to me being able to actually talk to her. In my current state here, I do horribly with most teens. All Might hummed in understanding, and he let go of Izuku's shoulders and turned back to look at Kendo and Torino. Well, you have 3 years to get better at it in UA. By the time you graduate, you'll be fine at communicating, I'm sure of it. All Might said. Izuku nodded and opened his mouth to reply, but before he could they were interrupted by Gran Torino. Medic! He yelled, obviously meaning Izuku. Izuku sighed and walked over to Kendo, who now had a broken arm that was sickeningly elongated from the elbow down. By the looks of it, he was going to have a very busy 10 months. It took 2 months before Kendo finally found a way to safely use One for All. It had been a normal day, with All Might and Gran Torino doing their best to help Kendo while Izuku and Kurono watched. Or, more accurately, Kurono watched while Izuku occasionally looked up from his notebook where he was writing down about One for All and its past users. Izuku figured that if he could figure out who the past users were and how they used One for All, then maybe he'd be able to find something that could help Kendo progress. So, which user are you researching right now? Kurono asked, interrupting Izuku's research. Seeing as there's not much more we can find on Nana for now, I'm focusing on the 6th user, Izuku replied. Nana Shimura had proven to be the easiest. Short of All Might. This was primarily because they not only had more records and media than any other user barring All Might, but they had primary sources thanks to Gran Torino and All Might, who had lived to see Nana in action. Thanks to the combination of records and the two men, Izuku had quickly pieced together a folder on Nana. She was 44 when she died and was active for 24 years. Apparently 2 years between graduating UA and becoming a hero were spent traveling the world, and her hero name was Perseverance. She received one for all when she was 34, meaning she had it for 10 years before her death. According to All Might, Gran Torino and some old footage, her fighting style consisted mostly of grappling and short jabs, generally preferring to weaken her opponent slowly and surely before doing the finishing blow. She also had a family, but they all died in a freak accident around 14 years ago which had an unknown cause. Unfortunately, every user ROM 1-6 proved incredibly hard to find info on, which meant Izuku had to comb his way through records until he found possible candidates. Perhaps we should stop for a break, All Might suggested, which Gran Torino surprisingly agreed to. Kendo, grateful for the break, walked over and plonked herself down next to Kurono and Izuku. "How's it going?" Kendo asked. "Just glad I'm not you right now," Kurono replied, smirking slightly. "Would you like some tea, young Kendo, Midoriya and Kurono?" All Might asked, appearing with a thermos filled with boiling water. They all agreed and thanked the man as he handed them their tea. Kendo was about to drink her tea when Izuku stopped her. "Let it diffuse first, Kendo. Tea isn't exactly nice when it's just boiling water with one super concentrated amount of tea, is it?" Izuku said. What he wasn't expecting, however, was for Kendo's eyes to widen in shock and for her to jump to her feet, the tea all but forgotten. "I've got it," she exclaimed, as she bent her knees and entered a combat pose. Suddenly, her veins began glowing red all across her body, and a few seconds later, orange and cyan sparks began sparking around her. She went for a punch. And while it wasn't nearly as strong as a 100% punch, it was still nothing to scoff at. And, most importantly, her arm wasn't broken. "Well done, young Kendo. You've improved significantly in these past 2 months to reach this point." All Might congratulated, letting Kendo bask in the praise. Gran Torino also grumbled out a short "well done." "Well, kid, you've now unlocked the ability to not break your bones. Now, we move on to the next step." "What's that?" Kendo asked. "Combat training," and without another word, Gran Torino jetted off the ground and smacked right into Kendo's gut, making her heave. Izuku got up to go and heal her, but Gran Torino stopped him. "If she can't even take a single hit like that, then she'll be worthless in the real world. I don't want you healing her unless I say so, understand?" Izuku looked over at Kendo, who was starting to bounce back from the hit, and he reluctantly nodded. "Good. Now go find something to do that doesn't involve healing the kid, got it?" Izuku nodded. "Sure." And with that, Gran Torino turned back to Kendo. He saw that Kurono was busy drawing in his sketchbook, and Izuku didn't feel like going back to researching the 6th user. So instead he turned to the piles of trash littering the beach. "Well, I may as well practice using my quirk," he thought as he walked towards the first pile of trash he could see. Admittedly, Izuku disliked dirty things more than most people. His room was cleaned at least twice a week, and he always carried a face mask in his pocket just in case there was a lot of smog or dust in the area or if someone else was sick. However, Izuku knew that if he was going to be a hero then he couldn't afford to be as misophobic as he was. So, he grabbed an old microwave and began experimenting with different ways to reassemble it. As he did this, he sighed. It was going to be a very long 8 months. Despite what he first thought, the 8 months went by relatively quickly, and Kendo, Kurono and Izuku all improved their skills. Kendo had unlocked 5% of One for All, full diffuse as she called it. Kurono had taken advantage of the training to improve his ability to draw action poses, and Izuku learned to use his quirk in more complex ways than he'd ever thought of, and in the process, he also cleaned the beaches once he was done with something he just disintegrated it. And now, he and Kendo stood outside the walls of UA, preparing for the entrance exam. Seeing as Kurono was entering the design part of the support course, he had taken his exam the previous day. "Are you ready?" Kendo asked Izuku. "I feel like I should be asking you that, but yes, I am ready." And so, the two friends walked up to the door that led to the auditorium. And Izuku tripped over a loose brick. Ah, was all Izuku could think as he fell. Suddenly, his collar yanked back, bringing him back to his feet. I apologize if that hurt, but I saw no other way to slow your descent, a cool voice said. Izuku turned to see a girl who was a tiny bit shorter than himself. She had chin-length silvery hair that was parted to the left and covered her eye. Her one visible eye was a pale blue, and she had dark eye bags as well. Interestingly enough, she held her arms in the same way Izuku's had already defaulted to, hands held elbow high with the hands draped down. Yeah you, he spluttered as she watched patiently. He means thank you. Kendo butted in, wearing a strained smile from Izuku's incompetence at social interaction. I apologize. I generally don't do well at socialization either, and with that, the ghost girl, as Izuku now named her, walked past and into Ua. Nice one, Izuku, Kendo teased as they began walking again. Shut up, I was put on the spot. Izuku replied. Endo just replied with a cheeky, sure, as they entered the vast auditorium. It was pretty dark, with red curtains on the sides, and up front was a stage and a large screen which simply showed a countdown that was currently at 6 o'clock. Kendo and Izuku found their seats, and they simply chatted until the countdown had counted down entirely, at which point, a man walked onto the stage who Izuku did not recognize. He had greasy black hair and wore a black outfit with a long white scarf around his neck. The first part of this exam is the written exam, which serves the purpose of cutting the number of examinees in half. The rules are simple: if you score in the bottom 50%, you will automatically fail the entire exam and not be allowed to participate in the practical exam. Understand? There were murmurs of affirmation, which seemed to be enough for the supposed pro-hero. Good. Now follow the signs out to the testing areas. Cheat and you'll be blacklisted from every hero school worth mentioning. The crowd shivered at this threat. As not only did he seem serious about it, but considering this was Ua they could probably do that. Kendo and Izuku quickly got to the testing area. I wonder who that hero was. I've never seen him before, Kendo said. Izuku shrugged. I feel like I've seen him, just don't know when, he replied. Kendo hummed. Reckon I'll pass. Izuku snorted. Not even a question of if I'll pass. He asked jokingly. You're you, Izuku. Failing isn't possible. Now answer the question. If you studied enough, you'll pass. After he said that, they had to remain silent for the test, which was taken via a tablet. Many clones of ectoplasm watched to ensure there was no cheating taking place. One person had their test taken away and they were removed from the room, which Izuku assumed meant they had been caught cheating. After 30 minutes, Izuku finished his test, and when he looked at the clock, he saw that another 30 minutes remained. So Izuku checked his work again and saw no flaws. And once he did that, he started writing on the paper they were given for problem solving. Kendo's quirk seemingly got boosted by one for all, as I noticed that she looked surprised by the size of her hand when she first used it along with full diffuse, which suggests that one for all boosts quirks. I wonder how this could affect other quirks I know about. Would Kurono's quirk last even longer? Or even be usable when moving? Would Nemoto be able to use his quirk on large groups of people? Would Iranaka be able to control the entire compound? What would I be able to do? Could I theoretically use my quirk at higher speeds, or affect a larger area? Perhaps I'd even be able to control liquids. And Izuku was torn out of his writing by the bell going off, and soon an ectoplasm clone came and collected his sheet of paper. After that, they were all herded back into the auditorium, with a more recognizable hero on the stage, Present Mike, who Izuku started immediately fanboying over. Oh my god, it's Present Mike, I can't believe he's actually here and that I might end up having him as a teacher. I always listen to his radio show every Friday and I love the segment NTS where he brings on other pros like Ingenium or Midnight, and it's also. Excuse me. A loud voice ahead of Izuku called out, making him snap back to reality, but you've described 3 robots but on outsheet there are clearly 4. Either you've forgotten about the 4th one, or this is a blatant error on UA's behalf. And you. Izuku was surprised when he turned to look directly at him. Will you stop with that muttering? Or you just here to mess around? Because if so you should just leave. This triggered something in Izuku, because 1. This guy had just singled him out without any consideration, and 2, he was being an asshole. Izuku opened his mouth to retort, but Kendo put a hand on Hai's shoulder to stop him. Izuku sighed and just opted to glare at him. Glasses Boy sat down, and Present M.I.C. explained that the robot was the zero-pointer, and that they should just avoid it. Once that was said and done, they were herded into buses to head towards their respective zones. Unfortunately, was where Kendo and Izuku had to separate, getting on different buses. Izuku subconsciously pulled out his face mask and put it on. Even if this was a state-of-the-art bus, he was still reluctant to be there without a mask. As the bus slowly filled up, a familiar face chose to sit down next to him. Izuku panicked slightly when the girl who saved him from falling sat next to him because 1, he'd embarrassed himself earlier. And 2, she was cute. Izuku put it down to the eyebags. "Are you okay?" she asked. Izuku raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? When the boy called you out, I wasn't sure how you would be feeling. As you seemed rather bad at social interaction from what I had seen." No offense, Izuku was startled at how this random girl actually cared about how he was feeling. He sincerely hoped she made it into UA. "Oh, yeah, I'm fine now. It's not the first time I've been yelled at." Izuku replied cheerfully, but he realized he may have said the wrong thing when her eyes widened in shock. "Good lord, I do not believe one should get yelled at enough to be used to it," she said. Yes, Izuku forgot that most people don't grow up surrounded by yakuza and are taught by a narcissistic asshole. Don't worry about it. I was just raised differently, is all," Izuku explained. However, the conversation was cut short by the bus arriving at the fake city. Everyone poured off. With Izuku getting separated from the girl, he still didn't know her name. When he spotted her, he made his way towards her, but a hand suddenly clamped down on his shoulder. Firm like All Might, but not nearly as warm. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help but notice you were." Izuku drowned out the words he was saying. It was the glasses guy from the auditorium. Izuku really didn't like this guy so far. So, why not mess around with him? "What?" Izuku replied, cutting off the boy. To Izuku's delight, he repeated his spiel about leaving other contenders alone. When he finished that as well, Izuku replied with, "What?" again. This time, the boy looked visibly irritated, and when Izuku replied with another, "What?" the boy began chopping his hands and yelling about how tricking other people is not heroic. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at what had just happened. The good old, pretend you can't hear what they're saying, trick, a classic. "Go!" Present Mike yelled out. "Izuku, you looked at the top of a nearby tower to see him standing there. Come on, there are no countdowns in real life." And with that, Izuku ran in with the rest of the crowd, and he quickly splintered off into a side street to look for robots. Soon enough, he came across a three-pointer, and he overhauled the ground into a mass of spikes, impaling it in the head. Spikes were Izuku's best bet. They blocked other competitors while also serving as an easy way to defeat robots. As he ran past it, however, he noticed that it had a Gatling gun on it. Izuku looked at it, and an idea suddenly popped into his head. He smirked, loving the idea that he had. Shota Aizawa watched the examinees from the observation room, thoroughly unimpressed with most of them. A lot of them had quirks that just wouldn't cut it in UA. Most of them visibly had no potential, and others were downright nasty to the other competitors. Aizawa wasn't particularly fond of a boy with an explosive quirk, but at the rate he was going, he was seemingly going to end up in the hero course, unfortunately. Maybe Vlad would want him, hopefully. Of course, even Shota could admit that some of these kids had potential. The boy with hardening quirk, the leaderboard said he was Eijiro Kirishima, seemed to be respectful towards his fellow competitors while also being able to actually fight. A ginger girl named Itsuka Kendo was tearing through robots with a strange quirk that both expanded her hands and also granted her a boost in strength, speed and flexibility, and she also helped out a couple people too. Shota might actually ask specifically for her. And then there was, what in tarnation? The voice of Snipe cut through Aizawa's thoughts, bringing his attention to screen 4, where a green-haired boy was currently wielding a big freaking gun and absolutely destroying the robots. When a robot got too close, he'd extend an arm and destroy the robot in a single touch, leaving behind another gun, which he would use to replace his current one. Shota was stumped as to what his quirk was. Transfiguration, perhaps. What an interesting use of his quirk. When I first read it, I assumed he would use it to destroy the robots. Instead, it seems he is reassembling them so as to be able to utilize the gun implemented in it. Very clever. Nezu praised from his chair. Shota looked at the leaderboard, and saw that his name was Izuku Midoriya. And he had very quickly climbed his way to third place, just behind Itsuka Kendo and Katsuki Bakugo. After another 30 seconds of this, he decided to abandon the gun, and he now ran around collecting points like the other examinees were. Shota quickly found an observable pattern in his fighting. He either slams his hand into the ground to make spikes, or he run at them and destroy them by touching the robot itself. And while those attacks were incredibly strong, eventually someone might figure out a way to avoid them, and that's a fast way to end your hero career in a casket. He'd have to beat that habit out of him if he ended up in his class. Shota was impressed when the kid rushed forward to slam his hand into the wall of a building to catch some debris that was about to fall on a boy with tall purple hair, and without an ounce of hesitation. Most people with powerful quirks like that would at the very least hesitate, and at the most ignore it altogether. So he was glad that he seemed to not be as bad as other people with powerful quirks. My, it's been 8 minutes already. Nezu stated as he looked at his watch. I suppose it's time to release the 0-pointers. Everyone in the room shuddered, even All Might, who now that Shota thought about it, probably didn't have to fight robots when he went to UA. Hell, Shota didn't, and that was only like 20 years ago. Nezu opened a case that protected a red button and pressed his pawn onto it, and as loud mechanics could be heard in the distance, he let out a mirth-filled cackle that Shota swore made the room drop a couple degrees. This was going to be interesting. Izuku was starting to get tired from a mixture of quirk fatigue and running around. As he stopped to take a breather, he suddenly felt vibrations from the ground and furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. That's new, he said. Could it be the 0-pointer? Nah, there's no way it's that big. Although now he thought about it, Resent Mike never specified how tall the 0-pointer was, did he? Izuku turned around and was promptly knocked to the ground by an examinee that had run past. Izuku massaged his shoulder, and he looked ahead to see an entire group of examinees running from something. That something was revealed as it turned around a corner, revealing the absolutely massive 0-pointer. It was at least 10 stories tall. And while it didn't have any visible weapons, its sheer size was more than enough to scare every examinee in the area. Izuku was about to run away himself when he noticed something up ahead. Ghost girl from before seemed to have hurt her ankle and was sprawled across the floor. Upon seeing that, Izuku remembered how she had been so nice to him, even though they hadn't even known each other before yesterday. And before he knew it, Izuku was running at the 0-pointer. He only realized once he was halfway there, but it was too late to turn back. Not like he would anyways. What was the point of being a hero if you abandoned a person just because you could be gravely hurt if you helped them? Izuku ran at the 0-pointer, and he could practically feel the other examinees staring at him in awe as he disintegrated the entire robot with a single touch. Or, more accurately, everything except the legs, which fell to the left and crashed down atop the buildings. That sizable attack had exhausted Izuku. But he still made his way to the ghost girl. Are you okay? He breathed out. Apart from my ankle, I am in perfect health. Thank you for coming back to help me, by the way, she replied. My pleasure. Izuku put his hand on the girl's ankle and healed it, barely conscious of the fact that the exam had ended. There, now you can walk, Izuku said before falling unconscious from overusing his quirk. Izuku awoke to find himself in a hospital bed, but he wasn't in a hospital, more like an infirmary. He also took note of how there wasn't anything that implied he was seriously hurt, such as heart monitor. Which was good news. Izuku sat up, feeling well rested, and as he did he saw an old lady look up from her computer. Ah, so you're awake, are you? She said. She got off her chair, revealing her costume, which allowed Izuku to identify her as Recovery Girl, and made her way over to him. Honestly, I can't believe you healed that girl's ankle despite being exhausted. I was right around the corner. You know, she scolded. Izuku grunted. Wasn't thinking right. Let my heart think instead of my brain, he replied. Recovery girl sighed. Yes, I can see how Toshin. Ori considered you as a potential candidate. Anyways, you're free to leave. Please try and stay out of my infirmary in the future. Izuku had forgotten that recovery girl knew about One for All, to be honest. He muttered out a quick thanks before leaving the infirmary. He stepped out into the halls of Ua, and he quickly followed a map out of the building. As he walked to the gate, he took note of the area where he tripped. And he slapped his head. I still didn't get her name. He groaned. Izuku made his way through the compound to the boss's office, however when he opened the door he was greeted with an unfamiliar face. Sitting on the left couch in front of the boss's desk was a small girl with short pale blue hair and large red eyes, and most noticeably, a short horn protruding from her forehead. She looked at Izuku with sad eyes for a second before looking away. Izuku looked up at the boss and raised an eyebrow, eliciting a sigh from the man. This is my granddaughter, Eri. My dog. HTER sent her here after she somehow made her father disappear entirely, the boss explained. Izuku felt a pang in his chest, relating to how they had both killed one of their parents. He made his way to Eri and gave her a smile. Hi, Eri. My name is Izuku Midoriya, nice to meet you. Izuku greeted. Eri looked at him, but there were no signs of a smile coming anytime soon. Izuku wasn't sure how to handle a small child. But he wouldn't give up. Oh, and Izuku. Izuku straightened up at the voice of the boss, could you come here for a moment? Yes sir, Izuku replied as he walked over to the man. I want you to figure out what her quirk is. I'd take her to a quirk doctor, but your quirk analysis skills are so good I may as well get you to do it yourself. Reckon you can do that? The man whispered conspiratorially. Izuku looked over at Eri and sighed. On the one hand, it sounded exciting to be able to study a new quirk like this. On the other hand, this sounded insanely challenging to figure out. But, well, Izuku was always up for a challenge. Yeah, I can do it, Izuku replied, earning a smile from the man. That's my boy. Now, how did your exam go? The mention of exam immediately flicked a switch in Izuku's head, making him go overdrive. Oh, it was great. I almost fell over at the entrance, but this ghost-like girl used her quirk to save me, so it was fine. And after the written test, which went smoothly, was the practical, and that went really well, and I used my quirk to make a gun from the parts of a robot, and then later on that same girl from outside hurt her ankle and D was about to be crushed by the zero-pointer, so I used my quirk to destroy it and heal her, and then I fell unconscious. Izuku breathed in an industrial amount of air once he finished, having not stopped talking for about 20 whole seconds. The boss sighed, long tired of Izuku's habit to blab everything out all at once. You know, maybe you should start your research now, the boss suggested, and Izuku wholeheartedly agreed. Her quirk made her father disappear without a trace. Most likely connected with the horn on her head. So far, that was all that Izuku had on Eri's quirk, who was current. Sitting on a chair in a small laboratory Izuku had made out of a spare room. Ever since he was young, Izuku had been fascinated by the human body, specifically quirks. He even had a genome sequencer as well, which he had used to study DNA sequences, having found many interesting details, such as how emitter, transformation and mutation quirks all had sequences that differentiated them from each other. Currently, the machine was busy with some of Eri's DNA, which should only take about 15 more minutes, something that would have taken a whole day back in the pre-quirk era. Maybe I should study Itsuka's DNA sequence. What with her having 2 quirks and all that, Izuku muttered to himself, mentally tucking away the idea for later. Who's Itsuka? Eri asked, startling Izuku. Ah, Itsuka is a friend of mine. I should have a picture of her on my phone, Izuku replied as he pulled out his phone and searched through it until he found a picture. He showed it to Eri, who looked at it with her white eyes. She's pretty, Eri commented, which made Izuku laugh. Yeah, I guess she is. I always saw her as a big sister, of sorts. She's always making sure Kurono and I aren't doing anything dumb when we hang out, Izuku said. Is Kurono the one with the weird hair? Eri asked. Ah, so cruel. An overexaggerated voice called out, revealing that Kurono had snuck into the lab while Eri and Izuku had been busy. Eri's head shot up to look at Kurono, and she cocked her head to the side. Why is your hair weird? Izuku swore he could see Kurono's heart break into pieces at that comment through his eyes. It's because of my quirk, chronostasis. As long as I'm standing still, my hair can extend, see. Kurono demonstrated with a minute hand hair, extending it to the side, anything. G hit by the long arrow is slowed for a minute, and anything hit by the short arrow is slowed for an hour. Pretty neat, right? Eri's eyes lit up in fascination as Kurono finished explaining his quirk. She then turned to Izuku. What's your, Q quick? She asked, not knowing how to actually say, quirk. Izuku just smiled and knelt down to her level. Quirk, Eri-chan, it is pronounced, quirk. And as for mine, it's called Overhaul and lets me disassemble and reassemble any matter I touch with my hands, see. To demonstrate, Izuku used his quirk on a glass vial nearby and overhauled it into a pretzel shape. Eri looked excited about it, but then her mood dropped. My quirk is a curse, she said, the cheerful tone in the room doing a 180, my mummy said so after I made daddy disappear. He was holding me, and then my horn started sparkling, and then a few seconds later he was gone except his clothes. Izuku mentally catalogued this information, perhaps it could send living organisms to some kind of pocket dimension. But not clothes. Wait, that wasn't the point, not when he had just been told that Eri had been called cursed by her own mother. Eri-chan, Izuku said, firmly holding her little shoulders, nobody is cursed. Nobody. And that includes you. Nobody here thinks you're cursed, and we can help you with your quirk. Even now, I'm doing, science things to figure it out. Eri looked at Izuku with big eyes, which soon filled with tears which she let fall out. Izuku hugged her, and soon enough Kurono joined as well. A couple minutes later, the genome sequencer dinged, indicating it had finished. Izuku slowly exited the hug and made his way to the screen attached to the genome sequencer, which showed Eri's DNA sequence, which was interesting to say the least. Izuku immediately recognized the first part, as it was the strain that all emitter quirks shared, a fact he had discovered after comparing the DNA of Irinaka, Nemoto, Kurono and himself. While Irinaka, Nemoto and himself had the same strain, Kurono had a different one as his quirk was a mutant type. However, the truly interesting part was the strain that bore no resemblance to an emitter, mutant or transformation strain. Izuku quirked an eyebrow at this and called over Kurono, who was now free after handing Eri some toys that the boss had apparently asked him to deliver. Eri's DNA results came back, but there's a slight problem. Izuku stated as he let his friend take a look at the screen himself, the strain for an emitter quirk is there, but there's also a unique quirk strain that I've never seen before. Kurono looked at this and hummed. This is quite strange. Are you sure it's to do with quirks and not other things? Quirk strains are the only DNA strains that have a gold color, Izuku reminded Kurono, who slapped his forehead. Right, I forgot that. Perhaps we should research. That seems like a good option for now, Izuku replied as he made his way to the lab PC and booted it up. It opened up to a plain home screen which Izuku quickly exited to reach Google. Differences between quirk strains Izuku typed. The search result only brought back comparisons between emitters, mutations, and transformations. So they quickly gave up there. Quirk strain different from emitter, transformation and mutant, returned far more results, with the first link showing him exactly what they needed. It looks like Eri may have a stockpile quirk that releases as an emitter, Izuku muttered as he quickly wrote that down in his notebook and sighed, but what is she stockpiling? Kurono shrugged. You're the smart guy. He snarked. Izuku rolled his eyes and decided to continue researching Eri's quirk while Kurono decided to sketch in his book as he always did. Stockpile quirks are pretty rare, so there isn't much data on them. It's pretty likely she isn't stockpiling fat or anything, because most kids her age aren't that fat, and quirks generally won't activate unless it hurts the user, except for a certain quirk belonging to a certain ginger girl. Shock stockpiling is unlikely, as she doesn't seem like she gets hit often, or at all altogether. The most likely answer currently is. Izuku was startled when his computer showed a notification for an email, which he quickly checked. The address was JP, which caught Izuku's eye. At first he thought it might be a joke, but then he remembered only official UA staff have emails ending in JP, and his eyes widened at the implication that Nezu of all people had messaged him. Was it to tell him that they wouldn't accept a Yakuza even though he wasn't one? Was it to tell him in advance that he had failed and he should try some other dream? Either way, he wouldn't find out by just hypothesizing, so he decided to just rip the band-aid off and opened the email. Dear Mr. Midoriya, greetings. My name is Nedzu, the principal of UA, but I'm sure you already knew that. I want to discuss something I noticed you had writ. 10 on the working out paper from the written exam, something that I found very interesting. When I was reading through it, I was amazed at two things. 1. You know about possibly the most guarded secret in the modern world. And 2. Your hypothesis about how other quirks could be affected by it were very impressive. What I'm trying to say is that you've impressed me, Midoriya, and that I'd like to personally chat with you sometime. Perhaps you would like to meet sometime soon. If so, please reply to this email with a time and date. If not, I will simply have to force you into a conversation through alternative means. I hope to see your reply soon. Best regards, Nedzu. Izuku hadn't realized he was hyperventilating until he felt the telltale sign of Kurono using his quirk on him. Take a minute to calm down and then tell me what's got you so excited, Kurono said. Izuku didn't really have a choice, so he waited for a minute to pass, and as soon as it had he immediately began talking. I just received an email from Principal Nedzu, and he said he wanted to chat with me, Izuku blurted out. The room was silent for a minute. What? Kurono finally uttered out. Principal Nedzu. No, I heard you the first time. Why as in, why does Nedzu want to chat with you? Oh, I may have accidentally wrote about one for all on the working out sheet for the written exam. You're an idiot. I'm aware. It took multiple attempts for Izuku to write a coherent email not filled with fanboying, but after 30 minutes he finally had a reply written out. Dear Principal Nedzu, thank you for the email. Personally, I am surprised that you want to chat with me, but I accept your offer. Perhaps we could meet this Saturday at around 1 p.m. at a venue of your choosing. I eagerly await your response. Izuku Midoriya. Satisfied, Izuku stepped away from the computer and turned to see that Eri had apparently fallen asleep, and by God if that wasn't the most adorable thing Izuku had ever seen. He walked over and carefully scooped her up before walking to his room and depositing her in his bed. He knew that between emails with Nedzu and hypothesizing about her quirk that he wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight anyways. He exited his bedroom, only to run into a familiar face outside. Oh, hello Irinaka. Izuku greeted as the older man looked at him. Izuku still remember how he used to be scared of Irinaka when he was younger, but now he just viewed him as a cranky old friend that occasionally offered uncut gems of wisdom. Kid, how'd the exam go? Irinaka asked. He'd been surprisingly supportive of Izuku going to UA, a fact that greatly pissed of Nemoto, to the point where Izuku wondered if Irinaka had done it because he believed this was best for Izuku or because he wanted to annoy Nemoto. Either way, support was support, and he was gonna take it. It went well. I think I got a lot of points, and I met this really nice girl as well. Irinaka laughed at this. You're so grown up now. Next thing we'll know is that you've had kids with this mystery girl and you're Japan's #1 hero. Izuku blushed at this statement and waved his hands around. What? It's nothing like that. He stammered, which Irinaka laughed at. I'm just messing with ya, kid. Anyways, I gotta go talk to the boss. See ya later, and with that, Irinaka walked towards the boss's office. Izuku walked back down to the laboratory to continue researching Eri's quirk. Okay, so let's summarize. It's an emitter-stockpiler quirk that stockpiles an unknown variable, and this stockpiled variable can be used to seemingly erase a person from existence. However, according to Eri, it did not erase her father's clothes, implying that it may not work on non-living objects. It's clearly linked to her horn as well. As Eri stated, it began sparkling. Perhaps the stockpiled variable is stored in her horn, and it's released via the horn. Izuku quickly had to start writing this down on a whiteboard. And soon enough he had a couple theories as to what Eri's quirk is. 1. Eri absorbs light and stores it in her horn. When her quirk is activated, the light energy stored can be used to vaporize living objects. 2. Eri stockpiles kinetic energy gained over time from moving, and this kinetic energy can be released to teleport a living object anywhere in the world. If he had to be completely honest, Izuku was stumped as to how her quirk worked. He'd most likely need to see it in action to determine what it is, but seeing as it's a stockpile quirk with no identifiable source, that could take a while to happen. Suddenly, a notification from his computer alerted him to the fact that Nezu had replied to his email. He swiftly opened it to read its contents. Dear Mr. Midoriya Izuku, thank you for the swift reply. I agree with your suggested time and date, and as for the location for where we shall meet, I would like you to join me at UA so we may talk in the privacy of my own office. The gates will allow your entry unimpeded from between 12:30 p.m. to 1 p.m. on this coming Saturday. I will await our meeting eagerly. Best regards, Nezu. Izuku let out a sigh of relief that Nezu had agreed with the date he had suggested. He looked at his calendar and saw that he still had 3 days until it was Saturday, so he could panic later, so for now he could continue researching and hypothesizing Aries' quirk. And so, he continued that until 5 a.m., at which time he was passed out on his desk. It was now Saturday, and Izuku walked nervously through the gates UA in a personal favorite outfit of his, a sea green bomber jacket with a beige fluff over a charcoal dress shirt and white tie, with black slacks and red sneakers to top it off. Izuku was relieved when the gates did not automatically shut in his face. However, he was surprised to see the same scruffy man from the entrance exams walk up to him. He still looked like he was in need of sleep, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'll assume you're Izuku Midoriya, right? He asked. Yeah, Izuku replied. The man proceeded to turn around and walk away. Follow me, I'll escort you to Nezu's office. With that, Izuku began following the man into the school. Izuku analyzed the man, trying to figure out which hero he was. He swore he'd heard of him before from Yakuza thugs talking. However, he hadn't seen him make his eyes glow red yet, so he wasn't particularly sure. Why are you looking at me like that? The man asked. Izuku, realizing he'd been caught, was flustered and looked away. I was just wondering why you seemed so familiar, that's all. Izuku explained. The man sighed as they walked up a flight of stairs. It's illogical to care about the name of somebody who you may never meet again. The man replied. Suddenly, a door in front of them opened to reveal. All M. Izuku slammed a hand over his mouth as the skeletal man came out of the door. To his surprise, All Might laughed. Don't worry, young Midoriya. Aizawa and the rest of the UA staff are well aware of my time limit. Izuku took note of how he only said, time limit, meaning that mentioning OFA to the UA staff was a bad idea. The man, who was apparently named Aizawa, sighed again. All Might, if you have nothing important to say, then I suggest you return to doing your paperwork, as you have plenty to work through. Aizawa said coldly. All Might spluttered a bit before returning to the office, however Izuku took note of how All Might was doing paperwork at UA. Was he perhaps becoming a teacher? It did make sense, considering it would allow him to keep an eye on Itsuka while also letting him slowly exit hero work and enter retirement. However, Izuku would have to consider this later, as currently they had arrived outside Nezu's office. Here we are. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take a nap, and with that, Izuku's grumpy escort turned away, leaving Izuku alone in front of the door. He knocked, and when he heard a chipper voice reply, "Come in," he entered. Nezu's office, for lack of a better word, was comfy. The back wall was completely glass, giving a display of the UA grounds. The other 3 walls were white with dark oak wood accents, which went well with the black carpeted floor. The desk in front of the back wall was also dark oak, with a black office chair behind it and a high-end looking PC. Directly in front of Izuku were 2 black leather couches, one of which was occupied by the resident principal and cryptid Nezu, who was pouring himself a cup of tea. Welcome, Midoriya-kun. Would you like some tea? Feel free to take off your jacket. Nezu added. Izuku obliged and took off his jacket and hung it on a nearby coat racket. Tea would be lovely, thanks. Izuku replied as he took a seat on the couch opposite Nezu, which was the perfect mix of soft and firm. Nezu poured a cup of tea for Izuku, which he gladly accepted and sipped, finding it was Gold Tips Imperial. A brand that Izuku liked to drink if he could find it anywhere. So, Midoriya, I'd like to talk to you about quirks, if you were wondering. Nezu started. Izuku looked at the animal's beady little eyes, trying to find any emotion. However, it is surprisingly difficult to gauge an animal's emotions from their eyes, so he stopped. What kind of quirks? Izuku opted to ask. Perhaps we could start with the quirks of the Irinaka and Nemoto you mentioned on your paper. I am interested to hear what their quirks could be. And so, Izuku spent the next 15 minutes explaining the two Yakuza's quirks in extensive detail, highlighting their strengths, weaknesses and potential. By the time he was finished, Nezu looked impressed. Well, you're an expert at quirks, I'll say that at least. Nezu stated, which made Izuku smile. Yeah, but this quirk recently's been driving me up the wall. I just can't figure out how it works, Izuku replied. Nezu gestured for him to continue, and so he did. This girl, the granddaughter of the boss, she got sent to him by her mother after her quirk somehow made her father, but not his clothes, vanish. So far all I know is that it's a emitter stockpiler. A mutation of her parents' quirks, and that her horn sparkles when she uses it. And I can only assume that it only works on living objects. Nezu sipped his tea and hummed. That does sound like a troubling quirk to figure out. Have you considered taking her to a quirk doctor? Nezu asked. Izuku sighed. Well, boss wanted me to do it because I'm good at this stuff. And at this point I feel like I'd be giving up if I took her to a professional, you know. Izuku explained. Nezu hummed. It is not wrong to admit that you need professional help sometimes. Even I often seek out my colleagues for second opinions on decisions, Nezu said. Admitting defeat is often the first step to improving, and if you can never admit your faults, you will never grow as a person. Izuku sipped on his tea as he let that little nugget of wisdom sink in. Now that he thought about it, he really was being selfish by trying to do this himself, and it was about time he got a qualified person to step in. All right, I'll ask the boss to take Eri to a quirk doctor tomorrow, Izuku replied. Nezu nodded, and the room was filled with silence for a moment. If you don't mind me asking, why do you want to be a hero? Izuku was surprised by the question, and he actually had to think on why he wanted to do this. At first, he thought it was because he wanted to be a shining beacon of hope, just like All Might. But once he thought about it further, he realized what his deep, hidden motivation to push onwards really was. I want to prove that a true hero can come from anywhere in society. I want to show all those people living in the dark depths of society that even they can be a hero, no matter where they came from or how they were brought up. That's what I want to prove. Izuku replied after a couple minutes of contemplation. Nezu considered this for a moment and smiled. Well, that speech was quite inspiring. If Yagi had not already chosen his successor, I would have recommended you. Izuku was flattered and smiled back. Unfortunately, I believe we are out of time for now. 2 hours have passed, and I do need to get some work done. It was nice chatting with you, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku checked his watch and, sure enough, it was already 3 p.m. Izuku hurriedly got up from the couch and thanked Nezu for his time before being escorted out of the school by Aizawa. As he exited the school gate and waved his apathetic escort goodbye, Izuku smiled to himself as he began to walk to the train station. Today had been a good day. Izuku sat in his room, casually reading a book on biology, a subject that aided him greatly with his quirk, as the boss and Eri had gone to the quirk doctor to get a professional opinion on her quirk, and Corona was, somewhere. Izuku didn't actually know where Corona was half the time, and more often than not it was Corona who found him instead of the other way around, and it was the former for today. Suddenly, the door opened to reveal the resting bitch face of Nemoto, who was holding an envelope. Your letter arrived from Ua, he stated before chucking it on his bed and closing the door as he left. Nemoto had gone from outraged to just silently disapproving of Izuku going to Ua, which by all accounts was a massive improvement in Izuku's eyes. However, what he was currently focusing on now was the envelope from Ua. Izuku hesitated for a moment before quite literally pouncing on the envelope and using his quirk to open it. Out of it fell a couple pieces of paper and some weird disc. He recognized it as a newer model of a hologram disc after a second of looking, and after a couple of seconds it suddenly turned on, and Izuku jumped at the sudden voice of the man in the hologram. I am here. As a hologram, All Might yelled while wearing the ugliest mustard yellow suit that had to exist in the world. Young Midoriya, to say your results in the entrance exam were good is an understatement of your abilities. Not only did you come first in the written exam, good job by the way, but you also came first on the practical exam with a total of 78 villain points and 60 rescue points. What are rescue points, you may ask? Well, it'd be pretty bogus if a hero school only judged you on how well you could hit a hunk of metal. A true hero is someone who risks their life in order to help someone, and you portrayed that with this. All Might pointed at a screen behind him, which showed an instant replay of Izuku taking out the zero-pointer, and then proceeding to heal the ghost girl. That right there captured the essence of being a hero. Which is why you will be accepted to a hero course in Class 1A. Now, come young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. Izuku couldn't hold back the tears as he cried at the news. He kept crying until Kurono burst through the door, which startled him so much that he forgot to continue crying. Izuku said. Oi, Izuku. Did you also get into UA? Kurono asked. Izuku shakily nodded. And Kurono pumped his fist. Oh hell yeah. It'd be boring there without you. We better call Itsuka as well to see if she made it in. Izuku pointed at the hologram. No need. She came in second place. Izuku replied. Kurono came over and looked at the top 10 as well. Izuku Midoriya 138 points, 78 villain and 60 rescue. Itsuka Kendo 120 points, 60 villain and 60 rescue. Katsuki Bakugo 77 points, 77 villain and 0 rescue. Eijiro Kirishima 74, 39 villain and 35 rescue. Reiko Yanagi 73, 28 villain and 45 rescue. Abara Shiozaki 68, 36 villain and 32 rescue. Ochako Uraraka 65, 25 villain and 40 rescue. Tenya Iida 61, 52 villain and 9 rescue. Tetsu 59, 49 villain and 10 rescue. Fumikage Tokiyami 57, 47 villain and 10 rescue. Okay, so you did kind of good, Kurono snarked, which Izuku rolled his eyes at. I hope that Bakugo isn't pissed off at the results. From memory, he wasn't exactly welcoming towards people who were better than him, Izuku said. Katsuki Bakugo was pissed off. Not only had he not come first, but he also hadn't even come second. He came third. He came in third place. He couldn't even remember the last time he came in second or third place. In rage, he smashed the hologram disc. How dare somebody decide they were better than him? He hoped they were in Class 1A as well, just so he could beat their asses, and prove he was the best. Because if he wasn't the best, then what the hell was he? Bakugo decided to not let himself answer that question, it would only lead to more questions, which would lead to doubt. Which would undoubtedly ruin his entire life. No, he couldn't afford to doubt himself, not now. Not when he was about to be in a class filled with people who might actually have Betty. Are quirks than extendable fingers or stretchy eyeballs? Bakugo had laughed without shame when those two got rejected from literally every hero school that was available to them, and his position as top dog might be challenged. No, if he wanted to keep that position, he'd need to be both mentally sure of himself and physically sure of himself, and doubting himself would quickly mess up that state of perfection he was currently in. And then there was the issue of where he'd heard those names before. Itsuka Kendo. Izuku Midoriya. Itsuka Kendo was only a maybe in the, I've met them before, but. Izuku Midoriya was definitely somebody Bakugo had known or met at some point. But the question was where he had met this Izuku Midoriya, or even when. Entrance exam. No, he didn't see anybody who could possibly be destroying more bots than him in his zone. Middle school. Even if he didn't remember anyone's names, he was certain he was the sole person heading to UA. So where? Bakugo groaned and flopped over onto his bed. He wouldn't get anywhere by asking all these questions, so it would be more time efficient to go to sleep instead. He quickly drifted off to sleep, with his dreams filled with a strange green-haired child that he swore he had seen before. Izuku, Kendo and Kurono stood outside the school in their new uniforms. Izuku wasn't particularly fond of uniforms, they made him feel like he lacked individuality. So he slightly edited his by leaving the jacket open and slightly rolling up the sleeves, similar to how he had his bomber jacket. He, of course, opted to wear his red high tops. And his white surgical gloves were ever present on his hands. Are we gonna go inside or are we just gonna stare? Kurono asked. Izuku, and Kendo by the looks of it, snapped out of their stupor and began walking forward, leaving Kurono to catch up. Ah, let me guess, nerves? Kurono asked, looking a bit more sympathetic. Kendo nodded, and Izuku managed to get out a grunt in confirmation. In response, Kurono sighed. Listen, you two are the best in the year if we're going by the entrance exam. You have S-ranked quirks that will easily get you in the top 10 after UA, and the Shonk. You'll be unpopular or pretty slim I feel. Just go in and kick ass, my amigos. Surprisingly, this was an effective combination of words to Izuku and Kendo, whose nerves were soon replaced with confidence and an eagerness to begin their lessons. The trio walked through the front door, and unfortunately had to bid farewell to Kurono, who was in the opposite tower to the hero course. And so, Izuku and Kendo made their way to the massive Class 1A door, and they opened it after a moment of hesitation. And promptly felt their eagerness to start the lesson drop to the negatives as they witnessed the argument they had walked into. That is no way to ACT. We are UA students and should show more care to equipment such as chairs. The guy that Izuku recognized as the tall loud blue guy from the exams. Huh, what kind of stick did your old school shove up your ass? A voice Izuku recognized as Bakugo replied. A private I mean, Sume Junior High School. I'm Tenya Iida, for future reference. Huh, Sume. Aren't you an elitist? That's just more of a reason to end your ass when we finally get to fight. You the nerve. How do you expect to be a hero if you act like that? Hey, if it works for Maruko it'll work for me. Iida shifted his head slightly and took note of Izuku and Kendo at the door and he quickly power walked over. Hello, I'm Tenya. Heard. I'm Izuku Midoriya, and this is my friend Itsuka Kendo. Nice to meet you, Izuku said, sounding slightly unsure somehow. Thankfully, Iida ignored how he said it and focused on what he said. Midoriya-kun, I would like to apologize for my rudeness at the exams. You had every right to be rude back to me, and I now see that you were far more perceptive to the true nature of the exam, and that makes you the better man, Iida said. Izuku laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. I didn't know either, but I won't say no to the praise. Bakugo started, but someone cut him off. I am glad to see we meet once again, a voice from behind Izuku said, making him flinch in surprise and turn to see the ghost girl from the exam. Izuku's eyes widened in recognition, and he smiled. Oh, you made it in too. That's great. Hey, I don't think we ever introduced ourselves to each other. I'm Izuku Midoriya, Izuku said to the ghost girl, who kept her neutral expression. My name is Reiko Yanagi. It's a pleasure to meet you too, Midori. If you're just here to socialize, do everyone a favor and quit while you're ahead, a tired voice said from the ground behind Reiko. The two of them turned to see a yellow caterpillar, which was currently turning into a hobo. Wait, no, that was just a hobo in a sleeping bag. Wait, that's Mr. Aizawa, in a sleeping bag. This is the Department of Heroics, he stated, slipping some kind of yogurt pack out from his cocoon and slurping on it. Izuku could feel the rest of the class wondering who this man was. Meanwhile, he was wondering where he could get a sleeping bag like that because goddamn does his look comfy. I bought mine from Nobukuro Camping Supplies, Midoriya. Now shut up. Apparently he'd muttered that. He blushed and watched as Aizawa hobbled into the room, shedding his sleeping bag to reveal himself in his hero costume. He walked up to the podium and grabbed a box from under it. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Grab a uniform and get changed, then head to the training grounds. Lateness will not be excused, Aizawa explained, and before anyone could register the fact he was our homeroom teacher. He was already walking back out the door, leaving a bunch of confused teenagers. I guess we do what he said. A boy with red hair suggested, which everyone agreed with. So, Aizawa-sensei seems kind of strict, huh? A boy with yellow hair with a black streak said, by the way, the name's Denki Kaminari. He added, yeah, I don't wanna risk being late when he's our teacher. He looks meaner than the Pomeranian over there. Honta Siro, by the way, a boy with strange elbows who was apparently named Siro said, jerking a thumb behind him to point at Bakugo, who seemed to be blocking out any and all attempts at conversation in favor of getting dressed. Izuku was doing the same but was also listening in on the conversation. Speaking of Bakugo, didn't he come in third place? Just call me Sato, as well, Sato pointed out. Izuku noted that Bakugo paused as he heard his name mentioned. Yeah, and even then, the point gap between him and that kendo girl was insane. It was around like 40 points or something. Shiro said. Oh, Midoriya-kun, didn't you get first place? Iida asked. Izuku could feel everyone looking at him, including Bakugo, who was more glaring than looking. Izuku laughed nervously as he zipped up the sports jacket. Yeah, I guess I did kind of do that, didn't I? Izuku laughed. You're surprisingly casual about getting first place, Midoriya. I'm Ojiro, just so you all know, Ojiro stated. Izuku shrugged his shoulders. Well, I guess it's still kind of setting in that I really did that, Izuku said. However, at this point he had to exit the conversation as he was ready. And he'd rather be early to Aizawa than late. He left the changing room and jogged over to where he was. So far, he seemed to be the only one there so far. Oh, you're early. Good. You'll want to keep that trait if you graduate, Aizawa stated. Izuku took note of how he said, if, and not, when. However, Izuku decided to ask Aizawa something that had been bothering him for a bit. Aizawa-sensei, you said that it's illogical to learn the name of someone you might not meet again, but now that you'll probably have me as a student for a while, I was wondering if you could tell me what your hero name is. I swear I've seen you before, but I can't remember where, Izuku asked. Aizawa looked at him before sighing. It's Eraserhead. I won't be surprised if you haven't. Why God, you're the erasure hero Eraserhead. Now I remember. Your quirk can erase people's quirks, which makes it. Izuku was cut off by a menacing red glow from Aizawa's eyes. I wasn't aware I had fans, but whatever. Just don't do whatever the hell that was about me again, Aizawa growled. Izuku sheepishly nodded, and Aizawa dropped the glare. A bit later, Bakugo stomped into view along with Kendo. A girl with a black ponytail and Iida not far behind. After around 4 minutes, everyone was out, with a boy who was literally sparkling taking the longest. That was far too long for most of you. You'll need to be faster if you want to be a good pro. Anyways, onto the topic of today. We will be doing a quirk apprehension test. There was a lot of muttering at that statement, but only one person spoke out. But what about the opening ceremony? Or orientation? A girl who was literally invisible asked. I'm gonna be honest, I'm doing you a favor. Unless you want to hear Nedzu talk about fur metaphors for an hour. You wouldn't have any fun. Anyways, Midoriya perked up at the mention of his name. Aizawa threw a ball to him, which he dropped and then picked back up. You were the highest scorer on the entrance exam. How far could you throw a ball in middle school? Aizawa asked. I dunno. I was homeschooled, Izuku replied. Aizawa sighed. Whatever. Step inside T's white circle and throw it as far as you can, and you're allowed to use your quirk to make it go further, as long as you don't exit the circle. Izuku nodded and stepped inside the circle as he contemplated ways to use Overhaul. The most obvious solution was to throw it and then use a spike to hit it again, but that might backfire due to the shape of the ball. Izuku thought for a few more seconds before nodding. He lowered an ungloved hand to the ground and could see the ground crack in a circle around the white circle, and in a second, he was being lifted high above the ground, theoretically. He should be able to throw it further if he's higher. Once he's around the height of the towers of Ua, he stops and takes a moment to breathe. Then, he places the ball on the ground and touches it with his hand again, causing 4 spikes to pop out and hold the ball. Once it's secure, Izuku sent the spikes as far as he could, and once they were as far as he could send them, around 100 meters, if he remembered correctly. He made them aim and throw the ball as hard as they could. I hope that was what Aizawa-sensei was wanting, Izuku muttered before he began making his way back down by turning it into a spiral slide. Once he was at the bottom again, he disassembled the tower and reassembled it, so the ground looked like Izuku hadn't even been there. He then turned to Aizawa and the rest of his class. The former looking at a phone thing and the latter looking impressed with his abilities. 478.3 meters. Not bad for somebody with a quirk that doesn't increase strength, Aizawa stated, showing the phone to see it was recording how far he threw the ball. Izuku smiled, happy with his result, and returned to the class. So we can use our quirks however we want. Awesome. Kaminari exclaimed. Yeah, this looks like it's going to be totally fun. A girl with pink skin added. Looks like fun, you say. Aizawa said, changing the excited atmosphere to a slightly scared one with just the way he said it. Were you planning to spend the next 3 years of your life, just having fun? Okay then, in that case, I guess I'll just expel whoever comes last, seeing as they have absolutely zero potential. Got it. The atmosphere was now changed to one of panic and despair. Izuku, however, wasn't really worried. It's most likely some kind of trick to make us do better. Nemoto said things like is to get me to finish my work at a certain time. Still, it'd probably be best to do my best anyways, he thought. He looked around the crowd to see that everyone but a girl with a crazy ponytail was worried. Guess she figured it out as well. As teachers at UA are given even more freedom to do as we please with our class than most other schools in the country, which even means we can expel who we want, when we want, Aizawa stated. As he actually smiled for once as he pushed his hair out of his face, welcome to the Department of Heroics. Everybody lined up in front of Aizawa, who simply yawned as he looked at everyone. At this point, basically everyone but a select few were tired, those select few being Izuku, Bakugo, Kendo, the girl with the wacky ponytail, and the Polish flag. Right, time to face the music. It's illogical to show you all of your scores one at a time, so I'll show them all at once, he stated. He clicked a button, showing a projection of all the names. The girl with the ponytail, Momo Yaoyorozu. If he was right, had gotten first, Polish flag, Shoto Todoroki, had come in second, Kendo came in third, Bakugo in fourth, Izuku in fifth, further down in eighth place Wa. S. Yanagi. It turned out telekinesis was quite good for the test. She got 600 meters in the ball throw, the third highest in the grip strength test, and she carried herself slightly by levitating sand during the long jump. And way down at the bottom was Toru Hagakure, who must have been the invisible girl because a couple heads looked at her, and she was visibly trembling. Oh, yeah, I was lying about expulsion, Aizawa added. Around 18 people around Izuku all went, what? At the same time. Aizawa smiled again, but this one looked less murderous and more like he only smiled once a year and forgot AP. Art of the smile every time he did smile. That was a logical ruse to convince you to do your best. You all have potential for now, so you won't be leaving as of now. And, yep, with that, your quirk apprehension test has concluded. Get back to the classroom once you've changed and grab a curriculum sheet and give it a look. Present Mike will arrive shortly after to begin your English lesson, and with that, Aizawa walked away. It was just a logical ruse. Kendo asked, although it was more of a rhetorical question. I mean, it was kind of obvious, well, duh, Momo and Izuku said at the same time respectively. Kendo looked between the two of them for a moment before sighing. No, you guys are just smart, Kendo said. I thank you. I know, Momo and Izuku once again said at the same time respectively. Why do we keep talking at the same time? Izuku asked. Momo shrugged. Perhaps you are both of the same lineage, and were separated once upon a time ago, and now you've been brought together by the hands of fate. Yanagi interjected. Izuku looked at Yanagi, attempted to decipher it, failed, looked at Momo and saw failure in her eyes, and then looked back at Yanagi. She means maybe your long-lost relatives. A boy with a bird head, Tokiyami, if he remembered correctly, translated. Izuku nodded in appreciation. Who knows? Let's just go back to the classroom. Izuku suggested. After nods and sounds of affirmation, the group of 5 returned to the class. Unbeknownst to Izuku, however, a certain blonde-haired kid with an explosive personality had been watching him. There was only one thing on Katsuki Bakugo's mind as he watched Izuku Midoriya walk away. Just one, singular, burning thought. Where the hell do I know you from, Midoriya Izuku? Izuku entered the Shihasaikai compound as usual, nodding over at the various thugs strewn about the place. It had been a relatively easy day at UA, which made sense seeing as it had been the first day. It was pretty weird seeing pro heroes like Present Mike talk about English though. And Eraserhead was unique, to say nothing less. So, when's your first heroics class? Kurono asked as they walked through the front door. Kurono's classes were apparently pretty good, and his homeroom teacher was Midnight, So, he was definitely beating Izuku at something. Tomorrow, I think, Izuku replied. Suddenly, a small figure came out of a doorway. Izuku, Kurono, I got my quirk. Eri called out with a tiny smile. She was shortly followed by the boss, who was wearing a smile of concern. Izuku noticed this and raised an eyebrow, and the boss sighed. Izuku, come with me. Kurono, stay with Eri, he said simply before walking back into the room he just walked out of. Izuku entered as well, closing the door behind them. So, I'm guessing her quirk is destructive? Izuku asked. The boss nodded. It's called rewind. From what we know she can, well, rewind any living being or object back to a previous state. When I mentioned that you studied her quirk strains and what you found, they basically just shrugged and gave the professional equivalent of, figure it out yourself, the boss explained. Izuku's eyes widened. A quirk like that was practically unheard of, and it perhaps proved the quirk singularity theory published all those years ago. So, are you saying she rewinded her father out of existence? Yes, Jesus. That was one hell of a way to go. Although, Izuku had to wonder if he actually disappeared or if he just turned into a sperm cell or something. Izuku had to look further into this quirk. Anyways, you can tell Kurono if he gets curious and asks. Right now, I've got to sign Eri up for some quirk counseling. I think your counselor is still working. Actually, the boss trailed off. Izuku nodded and left the room, deciding to leave the boss to his thoughts. He opened the door to see Kurono and Eri chatting happily, and Izuku smiled. Hey, Eri, wanna hear what UA is like? Izuku asked. The entire class was waiting in anticipation, and the reason was obvious. They were about to have their first class with All Might, the #1 hero. Of course, spending 10 months near the man kind of desensitized Kendo and Izuku to him, but it was still pretty cool. So, of course, the entire class was confused when Aizawa walked in instead of the man, the myth, the goddamn legend All Might. Before anyone could ask, Aizawa was already explaining. All Might was supposed to be teaching you today, but his idea for the lesson made us all realize that he needs a crash course in education. Nedzu will be personally teaching him how to teach for the next 2 weeks. Until then, you'll be stuck with me. The entire class let out sounds of disappointment, but a quick flash of erasure from Aizawa shut them up. Grab your costumes and get ready. I'll be waiting for you in Gym Gamma. Don't be late, Aizawa said. He then clicked a button, which caused a bunch of cases to appear from out of the wall. Any disappointment from earlier was quickly replaced by excitement as everyone clambered over to grab their case, which had been branded with their seat numbers. Izuku opted to wait until the rest were finished, along with Reiko and Tokiyami. Kendo and Iida were attempting to calm them down, but they soon gave up once they were able to grab their cases as well. Finally, they had grabbed their cases and the trio could grab their own. I really hope Kurono was right when he said this would suit me, Izuku muttered. May I ask who this Kurono is? Reiko asked. Remember that guy who came out of the vents yesterday? Quote, Izuku. Kurono yelled as he burst out of the vents, startling Izuku, Kendo, Reiko, Momo and Tokiyami, who had all been on their way to the cafeteria for lunch. Help me. The pink demon is after me. The what? Izuku asked, very confused as to what was going on. Where are you going, Designer-kun? I need you to help me make babies. A slightly deeper than average feminine voice came from deeper within the vents. Suddenly, Kurono was being pulled back into the vent. Izuku you. Kurono cried as he was pulled away until he could no longer be heard. Izuku and company were silent for a minute before someone spoke. What a mad banquet of darkness, Tokiyami exclaimed. Ah, was, Designer-kun, this Kurono you speak of? Yep, still don't know who the pink demon is or what she did. But he was traumatized. Should we have done something about it? Tokiyami interjected. Nah. If Kurono was truly in trouble he would have just used his quirk, Izuku replied. Well, it is time for me to depart from the conversation. I shall meet you both at Gym Gamma, Reiko said as she turned to where her changing room was. Izuku and Tokiyami entered the male change rooms shortly after. And Izuku opened his case to see his new outfit. Izuku had to admit, Kurono knew how to design a costume. It was a black jumpsuit made of a thick, insulated material, with sea green accents. There were also gloves which went up to his elbows, but there were some cuffs on them that Izuku found retracted it into the cuffs, allowing him to use his quirk. There was also a respirator, which Izuku put on and found that not only was it breathable, but it made him feel like every other breath in his life up to that point had been low quality. Perhaps Izuku's favorite part was the sea green fur collar. Similar to the thick fur collar his favorite jacket had. All in all, it was far better than the original design he had been intending to send in. "Hey, Izuku, what's that?" Kurono asked as he walked past Izuku into the lab, where Izuku was currently sitting at the bench scribbling on a piece of paper. "Costume design request. I gotta send it in by next week," Izuku replied quickly. Kurono narrowed his eyes and walked over to take a closer look. When he saw what Izuku had drawn, he sighed and snatched it from the bench, surprising his friend. "Wah hey!" Izuku cried as he turned to face Kurono, who currently looked disappointed and a little miffed. "Izuku." "No," Kurono simply stated. "What do you mean, no?" Izuku asked. "You can't just have your hero costume be your casual clothes." Kurono yelled as he pointed at what Izuku had drawn. Indeed, it was just a drawing of Izuku's favorite outfit, fur collar and all. "Actually, you know what? Wait here for an hour, I'll be right back." And then Kurono stabbed him with the hour hand. "Well, guess I'll be here for a while." 1 hour later, Kurono walked in, and his quirk's effects disappeared. Aloan. The now floored Izuku to stand back up. Kurono then shoved the request form back into Izuku's hands, with his eyes looking both tired and proud. "There. Submit that. And I swear to God if you chong it back there ain't no force on this planet that will stop me from choking you," Kurono said before walking away. Izuku was dumbstruck, left with just the request sheet. Well, if Kurono designed it, it'd probably be fine. Izuku looked around the changing room and found that everyone else had pretty good outfits as well. Except for maybe Sato and Kota, because pure banana yellow spandex was not a good look. And shorts were just ridiculous, and it didn't help he looked like Ronald McFreaking Donald's long-lost brother. Todoroki's was freaking horrendous as well. Now he looked actually. Izuku's favorite costumes were probably Aoyama and Iida, honestly, with Bakugo being pretty high up as well. Now that he had seen the boys' costumes, he was excited to see the girls' costumes as well. Izuku was the first guy out. And once he was out, he found a couple girls approaching. "Oh, hey Izuku," Kendo called out. As soon as Izuku saw her costume, it immediately went up to the top of his list of favorites. The costume was a turquoise blue kipao, which was paired with a black corset. She also had a loose brown belt, and from what he could tell she was wearing black shorts underneath the costume, which he was highly thankful for. She was also wearing a black domino mask, which really finished the look. "Nice costume, Itsuka," Izuku said as he turned to look at Reiko, who was next to her. Now, Izuku Midoriya was not one to say he had a fetish, primarily because he'd never had one. But that day he discovered that his fetish was apparently girls wearing knee-length kimonos. Or was it girls with eye bags wearing masks? Wait, no, was it girls with fluffy collars? Maybe it was Midoriya. Huh. Izuku replied as he suddenly snapped out of whatever trance he had been in. In that time he had been spacing out. Reiko had appeared in front of him, looking slightly concerned. "Are you quite alright? You weren't responding," she explained. Izuku, realizing what that must have looked like, blushed and looked away. "Sorry, I was, thinking about something," Izuku muttered. Reiko was about to reply, but Kendo came in to save the day. "Let's just get to Gym Gamma. We don't want to keep Aizawa waiting," she suggested. Reiko and Izuku gave sounds of affirmation, and the trio trudged towards the gym. When they opened the door, they saw that Aizawa was talking to a trio of students that they didn't recognize. One of them was a slightly skinny but tall guy, who had long D that went down to his middle back and electric yellow eyes. He was wearing a midnight blue long leather jacket, with gold studs on the shoulders and golden cuffs with AC and DC on the left and right respectively. Under that he wore a vest that was a lighter blue, under which was a shirt which was black. His pants were a black leather, accompanied by midnight blue boots with what looked like amps on them. Oh, and he also had an electric guitar on his back, for some reason. The second pay. RSON was a pretty short guy with messy white hair that went down to his neck, which went well with his gray eyes. He was wearing a sleeveless ice blue puffer jacket with a white fur collar. Why does everyone have one of those nowadays? That went over a white turtleneck. On his arms were ice blue gauntlets with silver accents that went up to his elbows, which seemed to store something. His pants were white and baggy. And he was wearing ice blue snow boots with a fur lining on the cuffs. All in all, with the whole ice blue and white, Izuku wouldn't be surprised if he had an ice quirk. The Fina L person was also the only girl of the group, and she had a slightly annoyed look on her face. She had long black hair with yellow highlights pulled up into a high ponytail. She was wearing a black SP Orts bra with a golden spiderweb pattern on it, with a red gem placed in the center of the web. It was paired with a pair of pants that had a similar web pattern in the same golden color, and her pants seemed to be connected to her shoes, which were just plain black. "Ah, you three are early. I'll wait for the rest of the class to arrive before explaining. It's pointless to explain something twice," Aizawa said. The guy with purple hair looked at them and smiled. "Sup, Kahais. I'm your friendly neighborhood second year," he said, putting his hands on his hips. "I'm Koryu Denryu, the guy over there is Kyosaku Himura. And the girl is Futeki Joshi." Kyosaku nodded and Futeki just grunted. At that point, the door opened to reveal that most of the class had now arrived. They all walked and talked to each other and went up to where Izuku was. When the final person, Iida, surprisingly walked in, Aizawa began explaining. "Today you will be doing a simple sparring exercise, where your goal is to force your opponent to surrender or be immobilized. However, I have decided to employ child labor to help, and so your senpais will be helping. These three are considered the big 3 feet of the second year. Not as good as the big 3 feet of the third year, but they'll most likely be as good or even better by the time they reach their third year. I'm tired, so I'll be taking a nap. Listen to them, or you'll be expelled," Aizawa explained before walking off and climbing into his sleeping bag and zipping it all the way up. "Alright, here's how it's gonna work," Koryu yelled, making everyone jump. "Kyosaku. He's the short guy, and Futeki, she's the girl. We'll watch you guys fight to make sure you're not going too far, got it?" Everyone gave sounds of affirmation, and Koryu grinned. "Great. Pick a partner, preferably someone you don't know. And pick a spot in the gym. Once I say go, you can start sparring. And remember, don't do any more than what's necessary, got it?" "Great." And with that, the class dispersed to find a partner. Izuku was going to pick Kendo or Reiko, but seeing as he said not to, Izuku decided to find someone else. "Good luck," he said as he left Reiko and Kendo to find their own partner. He looked around to see who was available. There were a couple candidates, but Izuku wasn't sure of who he should. "Earthbender, fight me." Izuku spun to see that Bakugo was yelling at him. And God, if that wasn't the shittiest nickname in the world. Izuku sighed and shrugged. "If you really want to," he said as he went to find a place to fight. Bakugo soon went to the opposite side of Izuku and began stretching. "Where the hell do I know you from?" Izuku heard Bakugo murmur. Izuku hummed, not sure what he was on about. "Where do I know you from, damn it? I know we know each other from somewhere. So tell me," Bakugo yelled. Izuku thought about this for a moment. On one hand, he doubted it would end well for him if he revealed he was Deku. On the other hand, not telling Bakugo would end up backfiring somehow. He had to make a compromise between the two somehow. Suddenly, Izuku remembered the sludge incident. "We met when you were attacked by the sludge villain thing, remember?" "Same with Itsuka," Izuku said, hoping Bakugo would just accept that. However, mentioning the sludge villain seemed to piss him off even more. "God damn it, it goes even further back than start," Koryu yelled from where he was standing. Not a moment later, Bakugo was blasting towards Izuku, flying via his explosions. Izuku barely managed to retract the gloves into high cuffs before he dodged Bakugo's attack, feeling the heat of the explosions on his cheek. "Die, you freaking asshole," Bakugo practically screeched as Izuku slammed a hand onto the ground and tensing it. Suddenly, the piercing sound of the ground being disassembled was heard as the destruction went towards Bakugo. The explosive teen flew upwards to dodge it but had not been expecting the spikes which came a moment later. While he didn't get impaled, He did get a cut on his thigh and cheek, making him grimace. Freak off with that stupid gimmick. He yelled as he went towards Izuku again. Izuku tried to dodge again. But Bakugo anticipated it this time and he quickly redirected himself to sling an explosion at Izuku's back. Thankfully, Kurono was smart enough to specify a material T was pretty good at withstanding explosives, but Izuku's neck still felt like it had been burnt even with the fur collar in the way. Izuku winced in pain before he decided to erect a wall between him and Bakugo so that he could think. Okay, Bakugo has an incredibly versatile quirk which can do almost anything if he puts his mind to it. The only way to fight a versatile quirk is to limit its ions and to force it to stick to only a couple of possible moves instead of multiple. And the easiest way to do that is to have the environment against them. Izuku thought. Now that he had an idea for how to combat Bakugo, he felt like he could take on the world. He slammed his hand back on the ground and disassembled the foundations. However, instead of just spikes, Izuku made walls all around them while also taking down the one between them. I've limited your movements, Bakugo-kun. If you surrender now, it'll be easier in the long run, Izuku said, which made Bakugo snarl. Shut your mouth, you damn nerd. Just because you can make a wall doesn't mean shit, Bakugo growled before he began to fly forward again. This is getting quite repetitive, Izuku thought as he put his hand on the ground once more and made a bunch of spikes. However, these spikes were more calculated than the first bunch, intending to limit his opponent's movements rather than hit him directly. God damn it. That's it, I don't care. I'm using it, Bakugo yelled, which for the first time in this fight caught Izuku off guard. Just what the hell was it? And now that Izuku had made all the spikes, he realized just how much they impaired his vision, which made it impossible to tell what Bakugo was doing. You know, my gauntlets aren't just for style, they also store my sweat, Bakugo started, and as he said it, Izuku realized what was happening, so when I pull the trigger, it all comes out as one massive explosion. Izuku slammed his hand onto the ground and made a wall, but it wasn't enough. A massive explosion, easily bigger than any of Bakugo's natural explosions, blasted through the wall, knocking Izuku back with debris. Even the wall behind Izuku blasted open, sending Izuku way back to the wall of the gym. It was at that point that Izuku gained a greater respect for fur collars, as his one was so thick that it cushioned his head. He looked ahead to see Bakugo was approaching him. Alright, you shitstain. Now that I've beaten you, tell me where the freak I know you from. Bakugo demanded. However, before he could take another step, a blur of midnight blue, purple and electric blue smacked into Bakugo, knocking him out. The blur grabbed Bakugo and tossed them over to Futeki, whose arms turned into string and wrapped him up. Then, the blur stopped, revealing Koryu, who had sparks of electricity arcing all over his body. Jesus, what the hell happened? I could see his explosions a bit before you put up a wall, and they weren't that big, Koryu asked, the sparks fading after a second. Izuku got up to stand before answering. He said it was because he stored sweat in his gauntlets, so he could make bigger explosions, Izuku explained. Koryu sighed. That shouldn't even be legal, really. And considering what he did with them, I'll ask Aizawa to remove them from him until he cools off. Anyways, now that he's out cold, you don't have anyone to fight, Koryu said. He thought for a moment before grinning and snapping his fingers. Oh, I got an idea. He exclaimed, hey, everyone. Can I get your attention? Everyone stopped fighting to look at their senpai, who now looked extremely excited. Due to your classmate being a dumbass or a person short. So, how about this, all of you fight all of me. That statement sent the entire class into excited shouting. Koryu smiled and walked to the center of the gym. Don't be too rough, Koryu. Last time you did this to Kuruguchi and Akabara they walked funny for a week, Kyosaku said. Mina, Kaminari and Shiro chuckled a bit at that sentence. And Futeki slapped him across the back of the head. Dude, wording, she stated, to which Kyosaku mumbled out an apology. After that, the entire class, sans Bakugo, prepared in front of Koryu, who currently had his guitar out and was lightly strumming it. You know, I got a lot of pent-up stress to release. What with work studies starting up again, homework, and just helping out around the place. I've barely had any time to just let loose. Koryu said, Kyosaku, will ya do the honors? Kyosaku sighed and began counting down in a monotone voice. 3, 2, 1, start. The class pushed forward at that, being led by Kendo and Iida, the fastest in the class. However, none of them were prepared for Koryu's first attack. The entire class felt their ears being tortured as Koryu began to absolutely slay the guitar, playing perhaps the most amazing guitar solo Izuku had heard in his entire life. However, he'd find it easier to enjoy if the amps didn't amplify the sound so loud that the entire building was vibrating. Izuku knew that if this went on, he wouldn't be able to continue, so he quickly thought and overhauled his ears to block them off. With his sense of hearing removed, he could now actively focus on moving forward. When Koryu saw this, he smirked and began moving forward towards Kaminari after a final strum from his guitar. Kaminari saw this and smirked back. Izuku saw Kaminari moving his mouth, but he realized he still couldn't hear it because he hadn't undone his ears. He quickly did so to hear what Kaminari was saying. 1.3 million volts. He exclaimed, sending a torrent of electricity at Koryu as everyone else jumped away from the uncontrollable mass of electricity. However, Kaminari's smirk was replaced with shock as Koryu absorbed the electricity. Your quirk, Koryu said as the electricity began arcing around him again, actively benefits my own. He yelled as he sped forward and kicked Kaminari, knocking him back into Jiro and Kirishima. Knocking all three of them out. An iceberg erupted from where Todoroki slammed his foot down, but Koryu dodged it with ease, appearing in front of the boy. Kazba cuff. Koryu yelled as the electricity increased around his right arm and he punched Todoroki in the gut, sending him flying back into the wall. Izuku suddenly realized something as he watched his senior fight. He seems to emit electricity and has super strength and speed, similar to Kendo, however he also absorbed the electricity that Kaminari flung at him. By this logic, Izuku concluded that Koryu's quirk let him absorb electricity and turn it into raw power, which must mean he had a point where he ran out of electricity. Although, the problem was knowing how much electricity was put into each attack, or how much he even had stored up. Izuku threw all caution to the wind and decided to try something. He put his hand on the ground and absolutely focused all his attention onto what he was attempting to do. Suddenly, the ground beneath Koryu shattered and reassembled, creating a box around Koryu. Izuku made sure to leave a couple holes so that he could breathe. However, Izuku was not expecting a mass of electricity to stream through these holes, which formed into the shape of Koryu. You thought I could only turn electricity into power, didn't you? He asked with a sly grin. However, you didn't expect me to also be able to turn my body into pure electricity for a moment, did you? It was now dawning on Izuku on exactly how he was considered one of the best that UA had to offer. And he wasn't even at the top. He was just near to the top. A blur of turquoise smacked into Koryu, sending the gloating teen into a wall. This guy is no joke, Kendo said as she was revealed to be the one that hit Koryu. Izuku decided that this would be his last chance to get Koryu and went to make a dome around where the dust was still settling around Koryu. However, before he could, he felt light tapping on his shoulder. Hey, at least you tried, Koryu said. Izuku stood up and turned to face him, surprised. However, nothing could prepare him for Koryu's attack. Ballbreaker, he exclaimed as his foot slammed into Izuku's crotch. The entire world it felt went silent as everyone felt what had happened to Izuku. Hari Kurono cringed and let out a single tear randomly as a girl with pink hair dragged him towards the support studio. Toshinori Yagi felt a pain comparable to when he fought All for One as Nedzu taught him how to make key concepts stick in students' minds. Kosoku Kuruguchi turned pale, as a sheet for no apparent reason as he helped Akabara Nimori with science. Shinnemoto felt a wave of pride and happiness as he collected the protection fee from the flower shop owner. All in all, almost everybody was saddened by the trauma that had been inflicted on Izuku, and almost everybody hoped he would have a graceful recovery as consciousness left his body and he succumbed to the darkness. Name: Koryu Denryu. Quirk: Discharge. Koryu can absorb any electricity he touches and then convert it into raw power. His current limit is 10 million watts, which puts him at the level of 50% of One for All. Koryu's attacks are dulled against non-conductive materials, making the attacks as dangerous as his regular strength instead. If Koryu goes over 10 million watts, he enters a way mode similar to Kaminari. Over time, his power is depleted and must be replenished, which makes him far better suited to short battles over long battles. Towards the end of his first year, Koryu gained the ability to briefly turn himself into pure electricity for around 2 seconds. Super moves. Ballbreaker. Koryu activates discharge in his leg, and uses it to kick an opponent in the groin. This is often an instant knockout move, even if it is a bit dirty in more ways than one. Eruption. Koryu uses his quirk to power the amps in his boots, which are connected to the electric guitar he always carries. The sound produced by these amps is incredibly loud, comparable to Jiro's heartbeat surround attack, except it sounds kind of cool. Casbah Cuff. Koryu activates discharge in his arm and punches his opponent in the gut, which usually sends them flying. Favorite hero, Present Mike. Favorite food, American cheeseburgers. Likes, music, helping people. Thanks for watching guys, make sure to leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to check out author of this story. All details in description.